Good afternoon, good afternoon, everyone. It's great to see you all here today, especially during such a busy period at UNGA. I want to start just by saying that it's always great to have unlawful detainees return home to their families, and that is the best thing that has happened today. September 18 is Nizar Zaka, hostage aids president, kidnapping he remembers that it's the day he was kidnapped on, but it's also the day Siamak Ahmad and Murad were freed from Iran. But most importantly, we must not forget the other Americans left behind, namely Shahab Dalili and Jamshid Sharmad and others. No one understands the pain of being left behind more than Siamak Namazi, who was left behind several times, or Nizar, who was also left behind previously. We really appreciate the former hostages and unlawful detainees and their families who have joined us virtually from overseas at late hours of their night, so probably most of them would have preferred to sleep. We've got a packed agenda, so let's get started. First, I wanted to mention that Hostage Aid does not impose its views on any of the individual panelists and experts at this event, as everybody is expressing his own personal view. So we are delighted to have three panels of experts today who will discuss, first, one of the most important yet least understood aspects of hostage diplomacy, namely the role of media, the impact of media in covering such cases, and the dilemma that journalists and editors, as well as families of hostages and unlawful detainees, face. On the second panel, there will be a discussion about the similarities between cases and the lack of information that families in general face when a loved one disappears. Lastly, we will discuss the topic that is particularly germane to this year's UNGA session on the advantages and challenges of a more organized and international approach to combating the horrendous phenomenon of hostage diplomacy. During each panel session, we invite questions from the participants in the room, and for those joining us online, we ask that you put your questions in the chat window and to whom it should be directed. We will address these questions at the end of each relevant panel. One last point, we expect everyone to stay pleased for drinks at the cocktail reception at the end of the evening, except the virtual attendees, of course. Now we're going to start with a short video, introduction video that we will watch together. I would like to introduce our keynote speaker, Mr. Norman Roulet. Norman is Senior Advisor for UANI. He works as a business consultant on Middle East political, security, economic, and energy issues with an emphasis on the Gulf Cooperation Council states in Iran. Mr. Roulet served for 34 years in the Central Intelligence Agency, managing significant programs relating to the Middle East. Mr. Roulet served as the National Intelligence Manager for Iran at the Office of the Director of National Intelligence from 2008 until 2017. As National Intelligence Manager for Iran, he was the principal intelligence community official responsible for overseeing national intelligence policy and activities related to Iran and Iran-related issues, including IC engagement on these topics with senior policymakers in the National Security Council, the Department of State, the Department of Defense, and Congress. Please let's welcome Mr. Norman.
Good afternoon, and thank you. I confess that today is a humbling experience. I confess that today is one of the most honor-laden experiences I've had in memory. I've rarely faced a room with such courage, such undeserved suffering, such strength, such perseverance, people who give the voice to the voiceless, people who never forget, people who are extraordinary. This is a week when there are many important people in New York. Quite a few people who are just full of themselves too in New York. And they're all driving around in traffic, as we've seen. But by God, there is no group with a more impressive gathering than what we're seeing today. United Against Nuclear Iran, under Senator Joe Lieberman and Mark Wallace, have stressed regarding Iran the release of hostages for some time, and will continue to do so. The issue of government work, united government work on hostages worldwide, the hostage business that Hostage Aid Worldwide is so cogently cited, is woefully underdeveloped. Woefully underdeveloped. Today is a joyous day. There are Americans coming home from Iran. And we must thank the people who were behind their release. We have representatives from the United States, Canada in the room. And this took a lot of work. I will say at the same time that this deal has flaws that underscore why the work of Hostage Aid Worldwide and why your work is so important. It left people behind. The hostage industry was richly rewarded for what it did in holding these individuals. The deal will encourage people in Iran and no doubt other countries to think hostage taking gets you something. It also weakens other sanctions if financial inducements are provided, if diplomatic isolation is lifted, if multilateral voices weaken, then the entire sanctions regime weakens. I will say that I am not pleased that President Ebrahim Raisi landed in New York on a sanctioned plane and will be protected by the same Secret Service that protects former American officials and others from Iran's terrorism. Hard decisions must be made to release hostages. And for the family members in the room who have suffered so terribly, those decisions are seen as perhaps the price that must be paid. But our problem is the international community is not engaged sufficiently in uniting on this to not only bring people home, but to prevent this from happening again. The deal that freed these 5 amazing people who have suffered so much will provide resources that might encourage 5 more amazing people to remain. The people left behind are waiting for what? Their hard decision by a US or European government, 30 Europeans, for a massive financial inducement? I think we need two approaches that are highlighted by Hostage Aid Worldwide, but need to be reinforced. Within Washington, this needs to be a bipartisan issue. The Iran issue in Washington has been sucked into this maelstrom of JCPOA. Are you for it or against it? And nothing else happens. It is sucked into a world where our discontent and dismay is issued in tweets and social media statements and press statements. Our outrage is contained in comments that have no teeth, And sanctions against people who have no assets abroad, who do not use financial systems, who do not travel, and indeed belong to an organization or government where the government wishes they wouldn't travel, should not be touted as action. They should not be touted as action. What moves governments? What moves the Iranian government? It's multilateral diplomatic and economic isolation provided consistently. And that's absent on the hostage issue. So if you're looking for more tweets, social media statements, assurances that we're doing everything possible, well, we'll count on those. But for the people left behind, that's not enough. There are mothers in this room. There are relatives in this room, daughters. Their suffering is incredible. But if we had bipartisan support, framing U.S. action, and a consistent diplomatic approach, and I speak to American and Canadian colleagues in the room who would have a very difficult job, and our European allies to provide diplomatic and economic isolation and pressure on Iran's leadership, we can prevent more hostages being taken. We can change their calculus. We can bring people home. We can end your pain. There's a lot more important things to be said today, but I want to conclude with two brief comments. There are organizations such as UNGA, such as Hostage Aid Worldwide, and we're all working on this together, and we'll continue to do so. Your voices must be pointed at representatives and governments. The second comment is, never stop talking. Never stop going to the press. Never stop protesting. The moment you forget, I assure you others will forget. There are organizations in the US government and other governments who make this issue a priority. I won't go into detail about who what those organizations might happen to be. But this is a hard issue, and at the end of the day, this will not be solved by information. This will be solved by political pressure applied consistently. I wish you a very pleasant evening as you work through this hard issue. I look forward to your answers. I look forward to be inspired by you. And may God bless you all. And a happy September 18th, my brother. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Norman. I would next like to invite the speakers of the first panel to take their seats, please. We are pleased to welcome to this panel Paul Beckett. Paul is the Washington Bureau Chief of the Wall Street Journal and is responsible for news across politics and government, economics, national security, the Supreme Court, financial regulation, and the intersection of business and Washington. Before taking the helm of the Bureau in 2017, Paul was an Asia editor in charge of the journal's print and digital editorial operations across the region. It is worth noting that one of the most recent detainees in Russia is journalist Evan Gershkovich from the Wall Street Journal. We have Jason Brodsky on our panel too, who is currently the policy director of UANI. In this capacity, he advises former US Senator Joseph Lieberman, Ambassador Mark Wallace, and the UANI leadership on Iran. Jason is also a non-resident scholar at the Middle East Institute's Iran program and a member of the Atlantic Council's Iran Strategy Project Working Group, in addition to others. And we have our own Barry Rosen, who is one of the founding members of Hostage Aid, as well as senior advisor for UANI. Barry was working as the US Embassy's press attaché in 1979 when he became one of 52 Americans held under brutal conditions for 444 days by Iranian militants in the renowned Iran hostage crisis. This tough experience shaped his dedication to advocating for hostages and their families, despite his strong ties to Iran. We welcome also Dr. I'm not sure if she is online, Dr. Kylie Moore-Gilbert, an Australian political scientist specializing in Islam and the Middle East. Kylie speaks several Middle Eastern languages and has spent significant periods traveling and conducting academic research in the region. In 2018, she was unlawfully detained during a trip to Iran and served more than 2 years of a 10-year sentence before being freed in November 2020 in a prisoner exchange deal negotiated by the Australian government. Another virtual speaker, I'm not sure if he has joined yet, okay. And then, of course, our moderator, who everyone knows, Jason Rezaian, is the writer for Washington Post Global Opinions. He served as the Washington Post correspondent in Tehran from 2012 to 2016. He spent 544 days unjustly imprisoned by Iranian authorities until his release in January 2016. He is also a CNN contributor. We will kick off the media panel with a short video, so let's watch it together before we start the panel. Thank you.
The decision to go public with one situation as a hostage has its own set of advantages and disadvantages. But ultimately, it is up to each hostage and their family to make this crucial decision.
For my case specifically, based on the information that I have, which is probably incomplete, I believe that my family's decision to keep everything very quiet was critical to my safe return home. That said, we're often frequently seeing many cases in which the pressure from the media, from the press, is very important. So wide range and case by case in my experience and opinion.
There is no value in keeping quiet and not talking about the condition and the injustice that you're going through as a prisoner. And also never underestimate how important it is for a prisoner to know that the world cares about them and that they're not forgotten.
I think public awareness, public opinion, and public pressure has played a major role in my liberation.
On a eu énormément de soutien aussi de la presse. Qui nous ont beaucoup soutenus, qui nous ont aidés à porter le message, à faire élever nos voix pour que notre situation soit connue par le plus grand nombre et qu'elle ne soit surtout pas laissée dans le silence et oubliée. Ça a permis à Benjamin d'exister dans la presse, à exister dans la vie politique, certainement dans la vie diplomatique.
My personal experience has demonstrated that being vocal about your situation may increase the chances of securing your release. But this is not a risk-free option.
have me seated next to the tallest guy in the room. So thanks, everybody, for being here for a very important series of discussions today. I have been coming to UNGA since the year I was released, and the level of care and concern about hostage-related issues has shot up exponentially. When I first came, a day like today wouldn't be possible. So we have to give a lot of credit to Nizar and everybody at Hostage Aid Worldwide for organizing this important event. There's so much more work to be done. I also want to acknowledge the presence of Jamshid Sharmad's children who are here today. He was not part of the deal that released 5 Americans. Neither was Shahab Dalili. There are dozens of other foreign nationals being held right now, still in Iran. So I want to kick this off with a question that I'd like to ask everybody at the panel. There's been a lot of coverage of the release of 5 Americans from Iran today. How do you grade the media coverage? And I'm going to start with you, Barry Rosen, as someone who was one of the original hostages, but also has worked in communications and with the media throughout your career.
From my vantage point and experience, I think that I wouldn't give the grade as any higher than maybe a C+. There was actually nothing really that really discussed the background of what was really happening. Why are these people illegally detained? There's no real information besides who, what, where, and when, and how. But other than that, there's no depth or background at all. And I think what we need in terms of when we really discuss a hostage situation is to provide that information for the intelligent reader or one who is watching this. I think there are so many events going on during the day in and day out, that people sometimes see the release of the hostages and they blame the hostages themselves for actually getting caught in Iran or other places, and that's it. It's nothing more than that. And it needs an in-depth coverage, and that has not happened today at all.
I want to go to Kylie Moore-Gilbert, if she's with us. Kylie, are you there?
Hello.
Good morning.
Good morning. Finally, technical problems fixed. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. Good afternoon. It's such a pleasure to be on this esteemed panel. I could only wish that I was there in person and not joining you online. Jason, sorry, could you please repeat the question? I've just been engaged with trying to get myself up here on this.
I asked everybody what sort of marks that they give for the coverage, the media coverage of the release today. What was there and what was missing from your point of view?
I am not 100% sure how the US media has been covering this. However, my view is really that there was precious little detail given, and perhaps that's deliberate. I think if we're looking at hostage cases overall, particularly those involving Iran, all governments, whether that be the US government or European governments or others, tend to want to minimize detail as much as possible. Obviously, we know that the $6 billion has been released to Qatar, but other than that, we actually don't know very much about the deal at all in terms of its, how it was put together, why now, and what else has been offered. I mean, which Iranians have gone back to Iran as part of the prisoner swap aspect. I'm not sure whether those names have been released. So yeah, I think it's pretty obvious that these things occur in a sort of a murky grey area, both legally speaking and in terms of transparency and what the media is able to report on or even knows at all. And I personally would like more information, although I'm really, really happy that these 5 Americans will be released and come home to their families finally. It would have been great to see everybody released and nobody left behind, as well as more information about the $6 billion and how this deal was put together.
Jason Brodsky.
Yes,
It's great to be with everyone and Hostage Aid. Well, I would say I would give it a C, probably. I'm a little harder grader, I guess, than Barry. I think there's been a difference between the print and the TV coverage of the hostage deal. First of all, on the print, I noticed that most of the pieces in serious outlets do mention the Americans that were left behind, like Jamshid Sharmad and Shahab Dalili. But I don't hear any such coverage, or please, anyone who has seen coverage, let us know, on TV about the Americans left behind. And I think that's deeply unfortunate. So I have noticed that today. In terms of the commentary, there is sort of this debate that has gone on as to viewing this through a political lens. In terms of whether you think Biden is trying to appease Iran, or whether the Trump administration left these hostages behind, and it's a commentary on maximum pressure and its effectiveness. But there is very little commentary or analysis on the need for a broader strategy to deter hostage taking and what we do in this. All of the discussion is really on whether there will be an opening in U.S.-Iran relations, but there is very little discussion over how we can prevent this from happening again. So that is what I've noticed, and look forward to other answers.
Paul is the undisputed media king of the panel, so I'd like to ask for your take on how it's been covered, especially given the new lens that you have, having a colleague who is being held hostage right now.
I'm delighted to be here. Thank you very much for having me as a relatively new member of this very poignant club. I think, obviously, I'd rate the Wall Street Journal's coverage as, well, we're not going to rate it, actually. But I think the bigger issues that it raises is, I'm going to venture that if you went out and did a public opinion survey, how many people were surprised that there were 5 U.S. hostages in Iran to be released? How many would be even more surprised to know that there were others who were left behind? And so that, to me, the immediacy of the news, you know, when you, I'm going to venture that we put together, I know we put together a very serviceable news story. I think the issue that it raises is, why is this a surprise to so many people? Right? And if you cover it once, what will we cover next week? And what will people be writing about it a month after that, and a month after that, about the people who are still there? And I think that probably presents a much bigger issue. I would tell you from really genuinely that this is a subject that has always been important to us. I have to say that with having been 6 months in, when it is one of your colleagues, I could also not deny that it becomes even more important to you, and getting that importance into the bloodstream of the American media, I think, is an absolute imperative, a priority, and to some degree a tall order. So I would look at it on the scale of everybody in this room, obviously, is extremely familiar, but as coverage of it as an issue and as a geopolitical issue, and as an issue of the sorts of dynamics that really affect the relationships between important countries, I think there's a tremendous amount more coverage to be done.
Is there any other panelists on this on this? No. Okay. There was a piece last week in the New York Times about the EU Swedish official who has been announced as being held hostage in Iran. He was referred to as a hostage in the second paragraph of that article. How important is how we frame these stories right off the bat when someone is arrested? I can look around the room and I see other former hostages here. I've read their stories. I've written some of their stories. I've read the stories written about me. And you know, that not getting to the point very quickly has always been disturbing. And I feel like there is a shift happening. Do you all agree? And I'll start with you, Paul, because your news organization is sort of leading the way on coverage right now.
Well, I'll be happy to parrot some thoughts of the person who's probably driving this more than anybody else in the world, and that is Jason Ryan. So some of the things that you have to be aware of as an editor of these stories and reporters in these stories is how they come across to, again, the massive amounts of people that you want to reach who are not so familiar with the specific topic. So when Evan was taken, and you've cited these, I'm just parroting you at this point, Russia accuses Wall Street Journal reporter of being a spy is a horrendous headline. Yes, it is factually correct. Is that what's important? We know Russia has a history of nabbing people and falsely accusing them of being spies. Is it helpful to create the impression in the world at large that Evan Gershkovich even might be a spy? No. Is it incredibly frustrating for us as a news institution to have to face people within days of his seizure where they say, God, I'm really sorry what happened to your colleague. But he was a spy, right? How loudly do you have to shout at that point to try and change what has been written about your guy, which is he is a reporter for the Wall Street Journal, period, who was on assignment for the Wall Street Journal, period, who was nabbed in a restaurant by the security services as part of a hostage-taking exercise by the Russian government. Right? I would proudly say that we are probably the fairest news organization out there when it comes to tricky topics. We work at it extremely hard. To have other people characterize it as, yeah, but they said he was a spy. Well, Russia says an incredible amount of things that you completely dismiss as state-sponsored propaganda, and this is the one? I mean, you know, and then you have to start rowing very, very hard as a news organization to get the National Security Council, the president, the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, anybody you possibly can to say very publicly that your guy is not a spy. Well, how? So we've come full circle right back to where we started, and it's achieved absolutely nothing, right? It's much more impactful and I think fairer to the situation to say American reporter seized by Russia, and sure, at some point you owe it to everybody to say that he was accused of being a spy, comma, which the United States and the Wall Street Journal vehemently deny. Okay, but if you lead with it, you will only perpetuate exactly what the people who do this for a living want you to say, because it will sow doubt in people that, oh, maybe he was. So that's where I think there's a huge amount that can be gained by sensitive editing, and it is fair in a way that it is direct, and you're being able to tell the world what it is that you think genuinely and fairly it needs to know, without having to rely on the fact that one person says something and then you have a denial afterwards, which is to me a sort of has the appearance of fairness. But is in itself extremely misleading.
I want to take the same question to Kylie, but to also ask, were there examples of sort of egregiously irresponsible reporting on your case that you uncovered when you came back to freedom? And how have you sort of processed all of the coverage of your case in retrospect?
Thanks, Jason. I'd like to make a comment on what the previous speaker said just briefly before talking about my own case. So I think we have to distinguish. I fully agree with everything that was said, particularly regarding Evan Gershkovich and Russia. But I do think there is a distinction, I guess, when we're dealing with a country with whom the diplomatic relationship has entirely broken down, like Iran, like Russia, vis-a-vis the US, where there is no real risk in using the term hostage. I think if we look at China, for instance, or perhaps some other countries, Australia has a hostage in Iraq right now, for example, yet we have relatively good relations with Iraq. I think if the government comes out and uses the term hostage and then the media reports on that and uses the term hostage from the very outset of the person's detainment, it is a sort of a political statement on that person's judicial system, which could imperil that person moving forward if it's coming from the government and the media is reporting on it. So I do think we need to exercise caution at times until it becomes apparent that this person is actually a hostage, which is often a little bit later down the track. Obviously, Evan's case and all of the Russian cases are quite blatant, overt, obvious, and happening within the context of the Ukraine war and Russia-US relations. And obviously the Iran cases too, particularly when it comes to the US, I think we can pretty quickly say this person is a hostage. But I'm thinking particularly of the China cases. We have a journalist in China, actually, Cheng Lai, an Australian citizen who's been in prison for several years. And the government here, and I'd agree with them, and the media has, responsibly followed their line, has said we're not going to use the term hostage, even though privately we acknowledge that she is, because it's going to piss the Chinese off so much that it will make negotiating with them over her release much more difficult. So I think, grey areas and, we need to see the nuance. And it's not always a useful term to use from the outset, particularly before it becomes apparent, that something is wanted in exchange. But yeah, on my own case, obviously, I'd echo, Jason, lots of irresponsible reporting. I was convicted of espionage for Israel. Everybody knows the Iranian regime's obsession with Israel, or the Zionist regime, as they call it, and that I feel I was smeared by, including in Western media, that they would report, convicted, quote unquote, for spying for Israel or Israeli spy. I'm not an Israeli, and there is no substance to that accusation whatsoever. But given, I guess, people's views of Israel in particular, this was sort of, I guess there was a ripple effect in people's consciousness back home in Australia or in the UK, where I'm also a citizen. And people who might be anti-Israel or not particularly think favorably of Israel then sort of put me in that basket, or she must be some pro-Israeli Zionist spy person, therefore we don't need to care about her too much, or she's probably guilty because everybody knows the Mossad sends agents to Iran or whatever. No substance to this whatsoever, of course, and anything that the Iranian regime says needs to be taken with one massive grain of salt, as always. But for some reason, the Israel aspect of it seemed to stick. In my case, it played into those sort of Mossad agent tropes, I guess. And I think it damaged me, in terms of the campaign for my release and media coverage more broadly. So it is irresponsible, I think, to just, even if you put it in quotation marks, to just sort of regurgitate whatever an authoritarian regime is coming out and saying about the hostage. And even though technically, as the previous speaker said, it could be true, having that as your headline or reporting it as such, can create unintended consequences.
I think one quick follow-up on that. When we refer to wrongfully detained, I think we're very specific to say that Evan has been wrongfully detained, but then to explain that, we then say he's wrongfully detained, which is effectively the taking of hostages by a foreign government. So, and that's exactly how it's been explained to us by the US government. So.
I want to take a moment to acknowledge the presence of former National Security Advisor and former Special Presidential Envoy for Hostage Affairs, my dear friend Robert O'Brien. It's a really honor to have you here. We've been doing a lot of hard work behind the scenes on this, and we'll continue to do it. But I just want to thank you for your incredible work on this topic over the years.
Thank you.
Please, if Ambassador O'Brien would like to give a short word.
Sorry, I feel like I intrude on a panel here, so I apologize for taking your time, and thank you for yielding. Want to just tell you how honored I am to be here. I see many good friends, Deb and Hugh Dugan, who was the Deputy Speaker, and Nizar and Sam and Jason. So many people who, I love, and I'm grateful for your work on this hostage work. Thank you for the hostage aid worldwide and for what you're doing. If we're going to get people home, it's an all of the above effort. We have to use military rescues. We have to use third-party diplomacy, which is how we got Nizar and Sam back with Boss Ibrahim. We have to use American diplomacy. We have to use sanctions. And we're going to have to be tougher to deal with this problem. I'm afraid today's a good day for CMAC and for Murad and the others who are coming home from Iran. It's a bad day for the hostage enterprise because we paid $1 billion per hostage. So everyone with a blue passport now has $1 billion price tag on their head. And so it's a bad day for future hostages, and it's a bad day for the people that Iran's going to kill using the money that they got, whether it's Ukrainians with drones or Iraqis with Kataib Hezbollah or Hezbollah in Lebanon or Syria or the Houthis. That's $6 billion that's going to go straight to terror. And so we're grateful that the families are home, the hostages are home for their families. And I let them down. I was on the job as the SPIHA and as the National Security Advisor while they were in jail in prison in Evan, and I didn't get them home. And I apologize to the families at the time for not getting them home. And but we got them home at a big price, and the price is going to be paid in the future. And so we're going to have other countries doing these dastardly deeds and taking Americans hostage and taking other Westerners hostage. And we're seeing that in China now. There are over 30 people that are exit banned in China. And I know our colleague on the screen doesn't want to call them hostages. The Chinese are taking hostages because it pays. And they get prisoner exchanges with the hostages, but we don't have an effective tool to deal with them. And so the Americans and Westerners sit in China in jail, like the two Michaels did, until there's somebody prominent enough that the Chinese went home. Mm-hmm. Well, Jason and I and others are working on the CSIS hostage program. We've got to come up with new tools. So one of those tools is we have Chinese citizens, the Wall Street Journal's report on this, breaking into military bases every day. The military just lets them go because it's too big of a hassle to prosecute them. These are Chinese spies. Mm. Any American who breaks into a Chinese PLA rocket base in China is going to be detained for a long time as a spy, and it would take huge effort to get them home. We need to start rounding up every Chinese espionage agent in America, and if they want to do hostage exchanges, we'll do hostage exchanges. But we're playing this game with our one hand tied behind our back, and it's time for America to get tough. We can do it. If countries like Iran want to take hostages, we cut off their oil supply or their ability to sell oil abroad, and not just with sanctions, but with other means. Mm-hmm. It's time to put an end to this hostage game because it's too devastating on the families. I look out at Deb Tyson, my heart breaks. We're not doing enough to deter our adversaries. There are unfortunately bad men and women out in this world who will do terrible things to get their way. And we've got to take a tougher stand as the United States of America. We started that in the Trump administration. We got a lot of hostages home as a result, but we didn't get everyone home. And you don't think about the hostages you got home. As happy as I was to see Sam get home in Nizar, I don't think about them. I think about the guys who are still out there. I think about Austin, and until today, Nizar and Murad and others. So we've got to do a better job as a country, and we've got to come up with more tools. And that's where panels like this and organizations like Hostage Aid Worldwide are going to help us. And it's not just military, it's not just hard power, it's not just enforcing our laws to give us tools and people to trade to get our hostages back, but it's diplomacy. It's personal advocacy for the families. I mean, we lost Bill Richardson recently, mm-hmm. and it could be madly frustrating if you worked in government and you had Bill Richardson on a case. It could be very frustrating dealing with Governor Richardson, but man, his heart was in it. And when Bill Richardson passed away, they didn't talk about the fact that he was governor of New Mexico. They didn't talk about the fact that he was UN ambassador. They didn't talk about the fact that he was Secretary of Energy, these very high positions in the U.S. government. They talked about the fact that he was committed to bringing Americans who were held hostage abroad home, because that's what the American people want. It's such a privilege to be an American, and we don't want to be punished when we travel overseas, when we go overseas on business, when we go overseas as journalists, when we go overseas as diplomats, as soldiers, as tourists. We don't want to be taken because we've got a blue passport. And Americans are very sensitive to that. That's why there's so much support for Evan, and there was for Brittany and others. But our adversaries use that. They use our humanity and our love for our countrymen and women. They use that against us. And so we've got to make it very much more difficult for them to use that sympathy that we have for our fellow citizens, that love that we have for our fellow citizens. I mean, I kind of laugh when I hear how polarized the country is, and the country is polarized. But nothing will bring Americans together like taking an American overseas. We don't care what race they are, we don't care what religion they are, we don't care what their political party is. We care that they're American that's held overseas, and we want to get them home. But and as much as we're motivated to get them home, our adversaries want to use that motivation to take advantage of our country. And so we've got to eliminate this. The hostage taking as a tool of diplomacy, as a tool of political warfare against our country. And we're going to have to get tougher in how we do it, and we're going to have to be more creative in how we do it. And the hostage aid worldwide, and the metrics that you're developing, and the AI use that you're employing, these are things that are going to help us. This isn't one person can't do it. The SPHOT can't do it. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs can't do it alone. It's a whole of government approach to dealing with this problem, and it's a whole of society approach. And so for the NGOs that are involved, for Nizar and for others, and for the Foley Foundation and Deb with her one woman crusade, what she's done. This is something we all have to be involved in, and we'll get it right. And I when people ask how this all ends, how Evan's case ends, how we deal with the Russians, how we deal with the Chinese, I like how Ronald Reagan would respond when he was asked, "How does a Cold War end?" And Ronald Reagan looked at him, the reporter, and said, "We win, they lose." And that's what we're going to do with the hostage takers, and this is the start of it. So thank you all. Thank you for having me. It's been an honor of a lifetime to be involved in this enterprise, to get to know so many of you, and to be part of your life. Not a part of your life that you ever expected or wanted, but I've been honored that you've had me into your homes and families, and I think about you still. Pray for all of you, and God bless you all, and God bless the United States of America. Thank you.
Thank you. Jason, I wanted to add something, but wait.
Sorry to interrupt your panel.
No.
Right. I wanted to add something about what Kylie was talking about, and also the issue of definition of what a person who is wrongfully detained and what a hostage is never really discussed in coverage. That's one issue. But for me, another issue is sometimes I was recalling my captivity. It's 44 years ago. That was the first time that an embassy was taken in the modern era. In fact, in Iranian history, it's been done before, during the Qajar period in the 1800s. But interestingly, and I was reviewing a lot of the newspaper coverage of the Iran crisis, and there, a reporter had the gumption and stupidity of asking my wife if I was Jewish. Now, I don't know what that really meant in terms of why, but it certainly meant it made a big difference in the way I was treated when I was in Evin. And the threat of putting me on, at that time, Iran was dealing with the issue of whether they should put people on trial or not. And I was one of the first ones to be told that I would be put on trial until President Carter said, if that happens, you're in trouble. But the insensitivity sometimes of reporters in something like that, from that time on that was released, the Iranians themselves knew what was going on, and they absolutely treated me much more harshly than I thought it was warranted. Yes, I was a press attaché, and maybe they thought I was, and they did say I was a spy, because I was rounding up all the reporters in Iran in order to undermine the Iranian regime. But being Jewish had nothing to do with the issue for a reporter, and never understood that one.
Do we have a few more minutes? Can I ask one more question before I open it up to the audience? Jason, I want to ask you, Ambassador O'Brien talked a bit about the need for deterrence. One thing that he and I talk about a lot is that, this is a nonpartisan issue. It's not that it's a bipartisan issue. It has to be nonpartisan. I think if you go back and you look at the coverage of the hostage crisis, it was not partisan in terms of, whether or not there should be negotiations to bring you all home. I read a piece that you wrote recently about the need for more deterrence, something that I talk about all the time. How do we sort of get that idea that, it's as though each one of these cases is a brand new phenomenon every time it gets reported on. I and others have tried to kind of diffuse that, but how do we kind of get deterrence and the need for deterrence into our broader dialogue about this?
Well, thanks for that question, Jason. I think it's an important one. I think we need to, first of all, raise the priority of formulating a comprehensive hostage strategy for the U.S. government. I don't see the urgency in coming up with that strategy. And this is not a commentary on the current administration. This is a commentary of 40 years of administrations, Democratic and Republican. The immediate priority is always, of course, getting the hostages repatriated and released. But there has not been the elevation of or the prioritization of that kind of strategy. And in order to do that, I think that Congress is going to have to start providing more scrutiny and oversight on the hostage issue, more hearings. I think that if we look back, it's not just whoever is the president. Congress has been lax on this issue. I was looking the other day, and there was, on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, there was not a single public oversight hearing on Iran policy since 2020. That is unacceptable. Up until last week, that was the case. There was one hearing, an expert panel. So Congress has a role here to play, and I think that there needs to be two sides of a U.S. strategy for hostage taking. One is to deal with the supply of Americans going to hostile countries like Iran, Russia, and China, and the other part, is more of the demand side, trying to crack down or deter the thirst for hostages of these countries. Not an easy problem set, but I do think we can be doing more in this space. On the supply side, and I've been happy to see, and I saw Brett McGurk, Jason, in your piece raise this today to work with Congress, and I saw the President also raise this in his statement today as well. Thinking about how do we deter our own citizens from traveling to these countries, and thinking about restrictions for traveling to these countries. I know that it's very hard for families who have loved ones there who have life or death circumstances, but I think that we need to think creatively over how we put more restrictions on countries other than just North Korea by traveling there. That's number one. Number two is the demand side, and that is, I think that we should be denying freedom of movement to the officials from rogue regimes like the Islamic Republic, Russia, China, in Western capitals, rapidly shrinking their world here. So they should not be able to run around New York City, run around European capitals while Americans and European nationals are languishing in their jails. And not just those officials. I think we need to go a step further. Former officials and even the family members of some of those individuals. I think the split screen of having the families and officials, enjoying Vienna while we have Americans and Europeans languishing in jail is terrible. So we need to be shrinking their world. So that's the diplomatic part, and I would also say we need to really start to crack down on an automatic menu of penalties that will be triggered the moment a country like the Islamic Republic, China, Russia, takes hostages. And that's going to, I think, using the Canada Working Group on Arbitrary Detention that I think is going to actually be meeting this week, using that as a framework and a platform to start developing that menu of options.
Yeah, I'd like to take a few questions from the audience. I'm sure we have some. Don't be shy. Giselle.
I wanted to ask you guys, because it's about the media, what do you think is the reason that the major things that influence what just happened with the hostages today? Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now? Sorry. Okay, I just wanted to ask, because you guys are talking about the media influence, why do you think major events have been blended out while this hostage release deal was talked about? I'm talking about, namely, that, for example, 3 activists from Germany, UK, and US have just been, there was just a video released of them inside of Iran. They're in prison there right now with forced confessions. So that's the future hostages. Another one was mentioned today. Last week, my dad was in another court or sham trial together with the US government. So the US government was summoned to the court in Iran, accused of the same charges as my dad. You don't see one media outlet in the US even mentioning it. How come they're blending that out? Is that intentional? That's my question. I see you guys are like confused because I know the news didn't make it here. It was all over Iranian news. And the fact that you guys are perplexed right now is exactly my point. Why don't the American public know about that? Why is it not portrayed over here? Is this common that the US government is in court in a terrorist country? It's not. It should be making headlines. It should have stopped whatever negotiations we're doing right now. It did nothing.
Excellent question. No issues at all with your observation. I'm going to guess that, that part of it is that, you know, you get caught in a bit of a catch-22, which is no one takes any action that happens in court in Iran as anything but a government-administered exercise. So, I mean, I'm not contesting the interest of what you're talking about. I'm just saying if you were a publication that didn't have any interest in this topic or wasn't covering this topic very closely, I think you'd look at that and say, oh, well, that's all just set up anyway. That's not really a court case in Iran. That's an exercise by the government. I know you'll have you will make much better points. I'm trying to, yeah.
People who are in court right now are the same people who, from the previous administration, who have plots, assassination plots against them on US soil. So I wouldn't just take it as something that is made up over there. It's actually targeted.
No issues. I'm just trying to conjecture as to why something, as you say, that was on the face of it, as you describe it, very noteworthy, didn't generate the news that you would have hoped. And I mean, broadly speaking, and obviously there would have been ways to do this, it is covering in these countries, even getting people into Iran to cover them. You could have covered this outside, right? I'm sure it would have been possible, but getting people inside Iran to report inside Iran is extremely difficult. It's extremely difficult for us and for a lot of other American news organizations for many of the same reasons we've been talking about. So none of that answers your question, but that's what springs to mind when you raised it.
I would add, Gazelle, that this goes back to something I said earlier, that we are viewing this hostage story through a political lens. Not we, the media is viewing it through a political lens, meaning what does this say about President Biden? What does this say about Donald Trump, that these individuals were left behind on his watch? What does it say about Barack Obama, that one of the hostages, Siamak, was left behind in Iran? So that's always how we are viewing the coverage. And again, this goes back to, we are not giving enough attention we're only giving attention to the symptoms of the problem, not the problem itself. The problem itself is we don't have a strategy to deter hostage taking. I don't know how, I don't think there is a good answer as to why people have been ignoring this important context. I think it's been horrendous that there has not been any coverage of someone's case like on TV, I'm saying. Print, yes, but on TV, that there has not been any coverage on your father's situation, because he's not just, hostage taking is bad enough. He was kidnapped. So this is transnational repression, and this is something Americans should be concerned about because there are plots being hatched on U.S. soil. We have to look no further than what happened to the attempt on Masih Alinejad to kidnap her. So this is a public safety issue, and I do think that the media is remiss, woefully remiss, in not covering these aspects.
I would only add that I wish the media would cover the human side of the story more often. What it does to the family, what it does to the relatives and to that individual. And when that individual is home, what did that experience do to that individual? It's a story that ends immediately after the hostage is home, and nothing more than that. And I think that is the human condition, I think, that really hits everyone, not only Americans, but in my case, Iranians. I know how Iranians feel about that issue, what the family means to them. And I think the Iranian people are sympathetic in terms of what is happening. And if we want to reach them too, we have to talk about that human condition. And it's never really discussed in any American press operation at all. It ends very quickly.
Can I just add one more? Sure. I think that there's another area where the press has been woefully remiss, and that is, and I track this on a daily basis, the president is never asked personally about the hostages during media availabilities. Very rarely. I could count on probably one hand how many times, even Iran policy, he's been asked about that. And I think that the media has been negligent in that sense as well. And I remember when, the coverage from when Barry and his colleagues were taken hostage, and it was a nightly news segment. And now there's just sporadic coverage. And, it doesn't make it into a presidential press conference. There could be, a presidential press conference can come and go without any question on what you're going to do to bring Americans home. So I do think that there needs to be much more awareness of outlets on this issue.
We're going to have to wrap the session. We have another one coming. Carol?
That's it, but I just wanted to give a comment that Benjamin Briere was commenting. Benjamin Briere is the French hostage who was in Iran and was released recently. So he just commented, since not everyone can show on the screen. And that was in response to what Kylie and Barry were saying. And he said that the question, "Are you Jewish?" was the first question they asked him. And then after some conversation on religion, which he refused to answer, and he told them that I could be any religion, even Muslim, why not? They asked him, "Are you Muslim or Sunni?" So I just wanted to give his comments since he's online with us. Thank you, Benjamin. And thank you to the panel.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much for our panelists. And I would like to invite the panelists of the next panel. But before that, I want to thank everyone for this discussion, which will surely spark further discussions later. And I want to invite the second panel, please, to take their seats. Please, if you'd like the second panel, Jose, Deborah. Okay. And while we're getting organized for the second panel, we are going to play a short video to unveil the initial. There's Gazelle. So we're going to play a short video to unveil the initial results of an exciting piece of work that Hostage Aid has been working on, and which gives an indication of illegal detainment risk associated with travel by exposed persons. The app is available for download on both iPhone and Android if you want to give it a try. So let's see this app promo video before we kick off the panel. We are pleased to welcome on this panel Deborah Tice. I think most of you know that Deborah is the mother of kidnapped American journalist Austin Tice. Austin has been held hostage in Syria since August 2012 and is a freelance journalist who worked for both McClatchy and the Washington Post. Deborah, who spent 83 days in Syria looking for her son, has been advocating for his release for the past 11 years. Welcome, Deborah. Also joining us on this panel is Jose Pereira. Jose was wrongfully detained and held captive in Venezuela for nearly 5 years. Jose was one member of the so-called Citco Six. His only crime was that he is an American. Before he was taken hostage, he spent 35 years as an oil company executive and CEO of Citgo Petroleum. Today, Jose turned his focus to advocating and supporting hostage families enduring similar nightmares. He works to combine his career and life experiences with his strategic planning and relentless mindset approach to coach others through seemingly insurmountable situations. We also welcome Gazelle Sharmad. Gazelle is the daughter of Jamshid Sharmad, a German-American who was kidnapped in Dubai in August 2020 by Iranian agents and taken to Iran. In February 2023, Jamshid was sentenced to death in a sham process. Gazelle has been single-handedly campaigning worldwide to save her father from the Iranian regime's murderous clutches. And from the UK, we welcome Richard Radcliffe, who is able to join us despite the late hour. Richard, as you all know, is the husband of Nazanin Zaghari Radcliffe, who was taken hostage by Iran in 2016 while she had been on a family holiday with their baby daughter, Gabriella. His campaign to get them both home took him 6 years and involved 5 UK foreign secretaries, 4 submissions to the UN, 3 Magnitsky files, 2 hunger strikes, and 1 pop single and comedy event. And in the end, it took a very large village of caring people to get her home. Our moderator for this panel is Hostage Aid board member Ali Arab. Ali is also an Amnesty International USA board member and associate professor of statistics at Georgetown University. He combines statistical expertise with human rights to tackle global issues. Ali acts as a catalyst for change, uniting data and human dignity. Before we kick off this panel, we're going to just see a very short video together. And so please, let's watch. And then, Ali, it's for you.
First time we reached out to the American government about my dad's arrest was back in 2017 during the Trump administration. They were sympathetic. They said we will continue to monitor the case. We will try to do what we can to support you. And yeah, never really any actions, just, basically words of sympathy and all that.
I went through similar experiences as other dual national hostages. At early stages, my family has not received the desired and expected support from the government. They have asked them even not to publish my case with the reason not to affect negatively the alleged running negotiation for my release with Iran. Neither useful information enabling my family to make a picture from the whole situation has been passed on, nor any financial aid has been given to them. Gradually, and after years, the communication with government and providing information from their side has been improved.
As a hostage family, no one can prepare you for such a crisis. We were thrown in at the deep end and had to be in public eye from one day to the next. In the meantime, our governments are trying to silence us. In our fight to free our loved ones, we are united since we all have to overcome the same obstacles.
As for the current situation right now in 2023 and how the government is quote-unquote helping, well, they have reached a deal and they have excluded my dad from it. It seems as if they just don't want to do anything. They are happy to let my father stay there, which is heartbreaking. Happy to let my father.
Right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for attending the event and such great panelists. And also, I want to mention Richard on Zoom is with us. So Hostage Aid Worldwide is a global organization, and so we have actually a global representation today of cases on Iran, Syria, and Venezuela. Barry mentioned something in the previous panel, Barry Rosen, that the toll that the hostage-taking process takes on the families. And so this panel, the theme is really on that and the shared experiences and understanding sort of the difficulties that you all navigate. So I want to ask the first question, Giselle, let me start from you. In those early stages, when this happened, when the issue with your father happened, his kidnapping and hostage-taking, basically, how did you navigate those early stages? Did you get any government support? How did you decide to go public? Of course, in your case, I think it's a little bit different because the case was already public. And I want to ask this same question from everybody else. Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Ali, for this question. I did not decide to go public with my dad's case. The Islamic regime decided to go public by kidnapping him and showing his kidnapping video and blindfolded, tortured to confessions in front of the whole world. We just took an American, German national, and you can't do anything about it. And so all I had to do for the first year is go against the propaganda that the regime put out, because as we just heard in the previous panel, how they're taking a hostage, Evan, to Russia, a journalist, and they're portraying him in the media with charges, espionage charges. Well, that's what they do with most people, but if you have actually been a critic of this regime for years and years, there's not just one story out against you to assassinate your character, to make you look like a bad person. There are billions of stories. So going against those stories, against that propaganda, took most of my time since these 3 years to even get the word out that my dad is not whatever the Islamic regime makes him out to be. He is a journalist, he is an activist, he is a father who was just kidnapped in front of the eyes of the world without anybody saying a peep. that was my first experience. Do you want me to?
Well, let me get
Sure.
back to you. Let me ask Deborah. So Deborah, how about your case? How did you, when did you decide to go public with the case, and what type of government support did you receive on those early stages?
We were hugely blessed because we never had to make the decision about whether or not to go public. First of all, I want to make it really clear. Austin was not snatched. He was not hunted. They were not trying to get him. There was a series of unfortunate events where he fell into their possession. And so when he fell into their possession, our protecting power of a Felipe, the Czech ambassador in Damascus, was very keen to get Hillary Clinton agitated about getting Austin out of the possession of the Syrian government. And so there were things so appropriately called dip notes. Dip notes. Yeah, they're dip notes. So anyway, those were flying across the ocean, and nothing was happening, and Eva was very concerned about Austin. And so she went to Prague, and she asked her newsman when she went on news TV to ask her about Austin Tice. And so that is how his situation was made known. The short story of how that worked out, it was August of 2012. There was a very tight election coming up in November, and Hillary was not going to do anything that could be judged. And so for her own political future, she decided to leave Austin there.
Well, thanks for sharing that. Let me go to Richard, ask this question from Richard. So tell us about that, Richard. What was the factors that you had to navigate about going public, and what kind of support did you get on that?
Yeah, hi everyone. Good evening. So we went public after about a month, which felt like a time. And Nazanin was taken; she was on holiday, and our daughter had her passport confiscated and was sent to her grandparents. So it was very disorienting and very scary. I was probably lucky that I met a number of other hostage families very early on. And they all had a different story. And as Anna O'Shea was saying in the video earlier, like, you can't really give advice to anyone to do. We all have to work it out for ourselves, and there are different circumstances. But every single person told me that in their own case, they wished they'd gone public earlier. Now that was a sample of 4 people I met, but it was persuasive. So I went public, and I think I just thought she was stuck in solitary confinement. I just wanted to break the isolation. It wasn't really any more strategic than that, and it was really feeling that whatever Iran was doing was crazy, and there must be something else going on, and speaking out could only make her safer. Over time, I think more of campaigning became about nudging the British government and creating political pressure to get them to do something. But in the very first instance, it was around just making noise to get her safe. And yeah, it did do that. Within a week of us publicising it, she had her first family visit. Within 2 weeks, she was out of solitary. Got put back in solitary later on. It wasn't a magic wand or anything. But it felt that sort of wave of people caring. Like, people can't help if they don't know you exist. And actually, it took a village to get all of us home in all these different cases. But a village can help if they know. Yeah.
And I will get back to you on the question of campaigns in a little bit, but let me go to Jose, because as a former hostage, you're on the other side of the story. And so could you share with us, of course, what your family was going through, but also were you aware of the efforts that were happening by your family, by the government, or any other entities?
Yeah, it's very interesting, this question, because as you said, it's the other side of the story. Our particular case, when this happened to us, really the first year, we really was literally unaware what was going on, because really we were isolated. I remember Jorge is here. We were separated. I saw Jorge like 1 year after, 10 years, almost 1 year after. Even that we were got the same day, I saw him like 1 year after. I didn't know what was, even where he was. We were totally separated.
So you were separated into different sections?
Yeah, yes, yeah. I went to I was put in a place that they called the submarine. It's a vessel that was totally locked. We had no windows, no fresh air, no nothing. I was with Gustavo, one of my colleagues, and I stayed there like 10 months. When we were changed to the new place, is that I saw Jorge and the other guys. We had no clue they were. And we didn't have no clue what was going on in the world. We didn't have no clue what day was, because we lost the sense of time. And at some point we learned that the U.S. ambassador was expelled. So the situation was really, really, really bad. So after that, we learned that in that first year, our family was instructed by the government that they stay silent, that they were trying to negotiate behind the scene. So the first year didn't happen nothing. And by that point, we already were having talking, because we were put together. And even though we were not in the same place, but we had the opportunity to have some talks. And we began to say, hey, I think this has to go public. But it was kind of surprising for us that our family already was thinking to do that. Before we went to them, they already had organized. And there was a guy that, I don't know where the guy appeared, but he was a pro bono guy that organized a campaign. And it was a real media campaign they launched. I remember we were always surprised, because we were getting information that their family was even going to the press almost every day. It was like a boom, boom, boom. And it began to create a lot of noise. And at some point, that's where created the name of the 606, appeared the name of the 606, because maybe for them was more easy say that instead of mentioning the six of us. So the situation, when you see the other side of the coin, you don't have no control of no situation, absolutely no control. In my case, at some point I began to smuggle a letter with my wife. We were receiving some food after 1 year, because the first year was terrible. Everybody lost tons and tons of, and I lost 100 pounds. And the other 15, 60, everybody was, So when we began to receive some food, we decided to begin to smuggle letters and begin to have communication with our family. So there's where we learned that everything was going. Yeah. And after some time, I don't know, 1 year and a half, I don't have the time. One day I remember that my wife, in one of the letters, she wrote me that they were having a meeting here with the U.S. government in Washington, and the day after there was going to be a gala with a foundation called the Foley Foundation, and that day I learned, because she read me, that there were Americans in Iran, in China. We were not aware of the situation. We really thought that our case was unique. And we learned that day that this was something bigger. And when I came out, already I was aware about the situation, because our families, and one of the guys that was with us, his daughter was one of the creators of the Bring Our Family Home campaign. So we were aware that there was going on something there. And at that time, we already were having better communication, and we heard that they were going to put the faces in the mural. So we heard there were things going on, sure. but no control. Everything was going without our control.
Yes. Great. Well, Deborah, so you've been campaigning for Austin for more than a decade now. So tell us about how your experiences sort of evolved through this time. What are things that you have learned through this process that can be shared with others that are going through this process? Also, speaking to government officials, did you have the sense that there is a coherent strategy, especially because of the time period that Austin's case has been taking, been multiple stakeholders, multiple officials, multiple governments, right? So please share that with us.
We've been through a lot. But you guys didn't bring any snacks, so you can't get the 11-year story. Bless your hearts. Well, you know, at the beginning, there wasn't all of this support and camaraderie. And I mean, thanks be to God over and over and over again forever, because we never had to make that hard decision. And so then after the election, and then people resettle in their offices, and that takes a while, and they have to figure out how the phones work. And you have about 3, 4, maybe max 6 to 9 months that you can get in there and work really hard, because our representatives have to get their jobs every other year. And so there's that time where they change offices and they learn how things work again. And then they have a time where they can work for you, and then they're campaigning again. And so you really have to be strategic to know, that it's got to be March 3rd, and you've got to get in there and you've got to get after it. And then the government will have this, well, you're going to need to talk to the State Department, and the State Department will say, well, I think that's in your FBI purview. And so there's all this siloing, which the hostage recovery fusion cell was supposed to be a remedy for that, and now it's kind of fallen away from that, but it did work for a while. So we've seen a lot of changes in how things work. But I will tell you that in 2011, there was a decision to shutter our embassy in Damascus. And then in 2014, while I was in Damascus, we shuttered the Syrian embassy in DC. And so we don't have a direct diplomatic channel to Syria. And nobody knows why we don't, but somebody decided to make that decision, and we may not know the bones of it, so we don't want to get into it and then find out we are making a bigger mess, and so everyone's just kind of going, ooh, right? And the Syrians don't have nuclears to motivate us to engage with them. They don't really have anything that we want, and so there is no really any reason. So they can always be backburnered, and that's where Austin is.
Thank you. So let me go to Richard. So Richard, could you talk about strategy and campaigning? What you went through on Nazanin's case, and what are sort of the silver linings of that experience?
Yeah, thank you, Ali. I think in our experience, it's a bit similar to Deborah's, in that I don't feel there was a strategy that the Foreign Office had. Candidly, I don't think any government I've watched in hostage cases has a particular long-term strategy. There were sort of windows of opportunity, and those were both, hedged by the domestic moment as to what was going on. In terms of when people were distracted with elections or when they were, actually interested in doing things, and also windows in the diplomatic relationship. And for the longest time, we probably weren't very aware of what those windows were. We came into it very naive. In simple terms, I think for us at the beginning, our strategy was to get Nazanin not forgotten. and to focus on people knowing who she was and caring about who she was. And that was a very human focus in the media. And through that, over time, making more political pressure on the government for its poor performance, for its, essentially its negligence in not getting her home. And we had at points had lots of political pressure, which ebbed and flowed. But I think at some point I realised that actually campaigning on our own wasn't enough. And it was really welcome, the initiative of Nizar and Hostage Aid, and connecting with the other families, and shifting the conversation essentially from a conversation about what's Nazanin doing in Iran to evoke the attention of her hostage takers, to being a conversation about what is the British government doing to protect its citizens, what is it doing with international allies to protect all of our citizens, and it being a conversation where the government sort of waiting and seeing approach was increasingly scrutinised. I would echo what's been said before, is that this is an area of foreign policy that is poorly understood, neglected, and really there's not much accountability for how little governments do and how poorly they do. So in the end, there is but in the end, it was those efforts that put real personal pressure on ministers for their failing to act, that got us the attention of the newspapers and the TV cameras, and that got then questions being asked government as to what they're doing. And it was, cumulative. There were sort of steps forwards and steps backwards. I don't think there was ever a strategy, but in the end, we made it transparent, the decision making that the government was doing, and they made a different decision.
And there's definitely a need for that kind of strategy. So, Giselle, so in your case, I'm going to actually use this as a segue to our next question and connect the campaign to also the difficulty of navigating all these issues while living your life and doing everything else that you have to do. And on top of that, now you have to run a full-time campaign. So specifically also tell me about how did you assess the risk of going public and campaigning? I mean, we know that it wasn't really your decision to go public, but campaigning hard about your father, given that he has a sentence that is quite scary, right? So.
Yeah, there's really no time to think about it when they kidnap your dad, and you know what they want to do with it. It was clear from the beginning that they want to murder my dad because they tried to assassinate him here on American soil in 2009. So that was not a question for us. What will happen? Will there be a court? Will there be a judge that is sympathetic to it? They made it clear from day one, we have your dad and we will kill him unless the governments do what we want them to do. So the risk assessment was like, my dad's going to die if I don't do that. So from that moment forward, it was forgetting about that I was pregnant at that moment. I was 5 months pregnant, forgetting about being a mother, forgetting about my job as an ICU nurse in the middle of the pandemic, trying to save lives. I was not that anymore. I was now the campaign to trying to save one life, which was my dad's, and doing it in a way that would not endanger us too much, the other hostages, the people of Iran, and everything. That was what motivated us. But I really want to talk about what happened today, and I don't know if you're going to ask me later.
We'll
okay, then I know I'm going to explode with this right now because it's not, yeah. But going back to what Richard just said, having the support of other hostage families, that's what kept us going. I think within the first couple of days, Richard found us, reached out to us, told us everything that he knew. Nizar, like all of these people, like reached out, like found us, reached out to us, told us everything that we have to know, because you don't know. There is no handbook telling you what to do, where you can go, who's going to help you. Why is everybody in the media reporting what the Islamic regime put out there instead of listening to the families who telling them, this is a journalist who was just kidnapped, putting out ringleader detained, terrorist ringleader detained in Iran, and you're like, who is that terrorist ringleader, and why do they put my dad's picture next to him? And just seeing like, oh my God, the stuff that the Islamic regime puts out is copied one-to-one into our media, and nobody has the power to stop them. That was the most terrifying thing. Getting to our governments and not being acknowledged. It took me 3 years and sitting for 1 week with Shahab Dalili's family in front of the State Department to get to speak to the State Department. Not even Anthony Blinken, not even the president, not even anybody who can give us any answers. Just getting to a State Department took us all of this time. Meeting our foreign minister in Germany took us 3 years. She just came and met me yesterday, 2 days ago in DC while we were campaigning here. Why would it take you so long? I'm an American citizen, I'm a German citizen. Why can't I talk to my government? Why are they not giving me any answers? Why are they trying to tell us every single time, shh, be quiet. Don't call them hostages. Don't go to the media. That can endanger them. And families believe that. We have right now, as I said, 3 activists from Germany, UK, and US who were on TV in Iran, forced to confessions. Those are new hostages taken. Why are we told to be quiet? Why are they told to be quiet when every single hostage that you can ask right now that was released told us the moment the media attention came on, we were taken out of solitary confinement. We were taken out of whatever we were. We were released. My dad right now for 3 years is in solitary confinement being tortured. And right now we're waiting for his execution to be taken out. Yes. If they're not bringing him out, I don't think what's holding them back from killing my dad.
Thanks for that, sharing that. So, and we'll get also to the topic of today. But before that, so Deborah, I want to ask you also about this issue of all these difficult decisions that you have to make, and how did you come up with a support system for that? Was that family support, or was that basically this notion of you have to keep campaigning until the government officials will respond to you? How much of that experience did you have to go through?
Well, this is just another thing where we were, not really knowing what day it was and which way was up, right? And in the very earliest weeks, we have 7 children. Austin is the oldest of our 7 children. And so at the very beginning, he was going to be home in a couple of weeks. And so we said, just do your thing, be yourselves, go forward, we'll take care of this. And that has been such a blessing because it's been 11 years. So now we have siblings that came out of high school that now have master's degrees and married and have children and have opened their own businesses. And none of that would have happened if I had chosen, and I would love to because they're very strong and helpful people. If I had leaned on them, they also would have lost 11 years, right? And so I'm really grateful. And so what came into that was Austin's connections with the Marines, with the Boy Scouts, with journalism, with Georgetown. That is where our support started flowing in. And people that work with me realize that I'm still pretty empty-headed and just kind of go, tell me what to do, blah, 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 just tell me what to do. Because I don't really know how all these things work. And I've only ever been just a mom. So I specialize in very clean white diapers and a pretty good chicken dumpling soup. And I'm really proud of that. And so it's been really hard for me to take on this lobbyist, dragon mother situation. I think Hugh could probably confirm that, when I say I'm going to be in DC next week, everyone starts planning to go out of town, So I feel really fortunate that it came about in that way.
Yeah, well, kudos to you and kudos to you and your brother, and of course Richard for all the hard campaigning that you've done and continue to do in your cases. Jose, I want to ask you a slightly different question now, because again, as a former hostage, you are experiencing on the other side of the story. You have the experiences. How difficult was assimilating back into society, being away for such a long time, being away from family, not seeing the changes in your family, in your neighborhood, all of that you had missed during those times?
Well, this is a very nice question, because when we came back in October 1st, we stayed 10 days in the military base in San Antonio, and that decompression process they call pizza. Not a pizza, P-I-S-A, pizza, okay? So I came back to my house October 11. October 12th, I did a first interview on TV, because for some reason I was when I began to realize that all this situation was happening to others, I said, "Wow, Jose, you have to do something." So what's happened? You know, my personal decision, and 1 month after, I was in Georgetown in the mural. I remember that I told my wife that I wanted to do a quiet trip to take, you know, some photo, and it began to be an event. You know, it was an event. I remember that Neda, she hosted me in her house, and well, it became an event. And when I met all these families, I began to meet all these families. I remember I met the family of Luke Denman. That he was in the cell beside us. We saw him every day. When I met his father and his mother, I began to meet all this family. I said, "Wow, Jose, you had to do something." And you know, since then I have been unstoppable. Sure. I decided to be unstoppable. Well, I decided to go unstoppable. That doesn't mean that I've been going through situation, because I went to a trauma center. I'm still having a therapist every week. I remember she telling me that, you know, you're going to begin to have episodes 1 year after. I'm going to have 1 year in 2 weeks. So, but this is Jose Pereira. I decided to go vocal. Today I have a community in LinkedIn, in Facebook, in Instagram. I do audio events. I try to educate people. I have a newsletter. So I decided to go vocal, because for me this is something that has to be stopped, and the people doesn't know. Every time I talk about this, it's jaw-dropping. The people don't know the situation is happening here. Exactly. So I'm doing it in an organic way. I'm doing it by my own, trying to educate people, and I decided to do it that way because, yeah, I don't know why, but I decided to do it that way.
Well, great. Well, I'm glad you're back, and it's great that you're unstoppable. We need that. Yeah. Well, thanks for doing that. Yes.
Yeah. We need more.
So we're almost close to time, but I promised that we talk about today. So of course, today's event, the exchange of the prisoners, and the fact that your father was left behind. What are your reactions?
How much time do you have?
Well, give us the short version, and then at the reception will be good.
Let's start with that this was not an exchange of prisoners. On the one side, we have hostages, innocent hostages. On the other side, we have actual prisoners who did something wrong, who were in a real court, and should have been in prison. Let's start with just that. Freedom is one of the most important things. We stand for freedom in America. I'm happy for every single person that is free, every single hostage. Nobody deserves to be behind bars, even for a second, even for a second. But when we pick and choose which hostages deserve freedom, that is where the problem begins. That's not where it ends, because I have a lot more to say about what just happened here and how the media portrayed it. This day will forever, their freedom of these 5 people will forever be stained by the fact that Americans were at the same time abandoned. Americans like my dad, Americans like Shahab Dalili, Americans like Afshin Batani were abandoned by our administration without a clear explanation why. Why is it these 5? Why not the other 5? How do you pick and choose them? Why would you leave anybody behind in the first place when you're doing any kind of negotiations? It should be about all Americans. Why do you not acknowledge them? Why is it that on all the media right now today, all the media turned into campaign tools of the current administration or campaign tools against the administration? This is not a partisan issue. This is not about the Biden administration. This is not about anything like that. Media should not be a campaign tool. Hostages should not be campaign chips to be used. Media had the responsibility to give us the backstory of what's happening. None of them did that. I did not see one media outlet that talked about what is going on in this deal. First of all, when you're doing any kind of negotiations to free hostages, this is never in isolation. You cannot pretend you're operating in a vacuum. What you're doing to bring these hostages back when you're leaving people behind affects those people left behind. When you're leaving the only US national behind with a death sentence, you're pretty much signing his execution by doing that. You're pretty much saying, we don't care about this one. We had the chance to bring some people out. We choose the one that didn't have a death sentence. What you're doing is affecting my dad personally. What you're doing is putting him in harm's way. This has to be reflected when you're talking about this deal. This has to be reflected in the media and by our State Department, which failed to even talk about my father or Shahab Dalili or anybody else left behind. The message you're sending out with us is also a political message. It's not about my feelings or that it's my dad or anything. This is a political message when you're leaving the one hostage behind who was a victim of transnational repression here on US soil, who was almost murdered here on US soil, while we have other journalists that are also targets of the Islamic regime, while we have an entire administration who is fearing right now, who's under surveillance of the FBI, just like me, just like my family, not safe here because the Islamic terrorist regime is plotting their assassination here on US soil. The same people, the same administration that was plotted to be assassinated is right now in court with my dad, facing terrorist charges, just like my dad. None of the US media outlets reported about that, even though it was in all of the media inside of Iran. And failing to do so does not help the whole issue. It shows them it's okay to continue plotting against US officials over here. Second, this is not just about the Trump administration that is right now in court with my dad. Also, as we said, a European diplomat, Swedish citizen European diplomat that was working under Joseph Borrell, under the External Action Service on the JCPOA, so a friend, so to say, is right now a hostage in Iran. So it doesn't matter if you're against the regime or in favor of the regime. It doesn't matter if you put pressure or if you were trying to negotiate with them. They are all either hostages in Iran or trying to be assassinated over here. We have to find out, and we are owed an explanation, who the 2 hostages are, whose identities are still not revealed. First, it was said that they're not revealed to protect them. They're back now, as I understand. They're safe now. It is owed to us, to the Americans and to the families left behind, to know who replaced us in this deal. Why were they chosen over my dad, over Shahab Dalili, over Afshin? What criteria were they chosen that made them more important, not important as a human being, more important and more urgent to bring them back right now, as opposed to my dad who was left behind? One more point that I want to make is about our secretary, Blinken, who reminded us today of Bob Levinson, and that the Islamic regime were not made accountable for Bob Levinson's death. Well, Bob Levinson was a patriot, just like my dad, who was left behind in a deal, and who did not survive that. So instead of trying to use his name as a statement for whatever you were just doing, why don't you explain to us why you are just now creating another Bob Levinson by leaving my dad behind to die? So we're repeating that over and over again. The last thing, and I swear I'm going to be done, is that we need an international global task force to include all of the hostages. I'm not just mad that the Americans were left behind. There are also dozens of Europeans that were left behind. Right now we saw Nahid Tarabi's daughter, Mariam Claren, who is advocating in Germany, because my dad is also a German citizen, for us over there. There are dozens of people over there. All of these countries have the same problem. And if we, each country tries to do their own little negotiations with the Islamic regime, they will blackmail us and they will get out of this much more than we are getting out of this. But if we have a global campaign that puts pressure on the regime and all of these countries work together strategically, then none of the hostages are left behind, and hostage taking is exactly, whatever the word, stopped, or at least not encouraged.
Okay, we're just going to take maximum maybe one question.
Yes, one question, and more power to you.
Sorry.
Okay, I have a question over there. Could somebody get the mic to them? And if you can introduce yourself, please.
Hi there. Can you hear me through this? Jimmy Quinn with National Review. So Gazelle, what do you make of the fact that President Raisi is here in New York right now? He met with journalists today. He has all of these meetings planned. He's going to be at the Council on Foreign Relations. What's your response to that as all of this goes down and your dad remains in Iran?
What a coincidence, right? It's all coincidences that he is here right now. It's also a coincidence that the $6 billion were just released in the same week that was the anniversary of the death of Gina Mahsa Amini. This is, of course, a joke. None of these are coincidences. I think this is all part of the plan, all part of the negotiations to have him come here, and probably was part of it. Like, there is a reason why he was allowed to come, and previously they were not allowed to come. It adds insult to injury that we have right now. Hostages are left to die, and the hostage takers are invited here and given a big podium to speak. People in Iran right now, this last week on the revolution, were beaten again, kicked, silenced with all of this pressure, and we're giving this regime billions of dollars. With our administration keeps saying, this is their money. We're not giving them their money. This is the money of my dad. This is my money. This is the money of the people who are being killed in the streets right now. This is not the money of President Raisi. I wouldn't even call him the president. They call him the butcher of Iran. This is not the money of the people who took us hostage. This is not the money of the terrorists that tried to assassinate us over here. But we're handing the terrorists the money to put more people behind bars. And we're telling the people a different story. This makes me crazy, and I can't go further into that without getting out of the PG-13 thing right here. It is horrific what is happening, to give a mass murderer a stage while we hostages are told to be quiet. It is horrific to legitimize this regime that is terrorizing us and leaving my dad behind to die, because we know that the regime has no more reason to keep him alive right now.
Do we have time for one more question?
One more question, then we can. Does anyone have any other questions?
Are there any online? Okay, well, let's thank our panelists again, and also Richard Ratcliffe is online at a late hour.
So our final panel will cover the topic of a more international or global approach to combating the hostage diplomacy business model. Overall, the current unilateral methods have shown unsatisfactory outcomes, which are slow, painful, and in many cases, very divisive politically. The Hostage Aid Board has been advocating for a new global multi-stakeholder approach to dealing with this problem, which leverages the collective wisdom of all the diverse experts and organizations, families, civil societies, governments, and so on. I will read just a small part of the open letter which we are sending to the Secretary General of the UN today, co-signed by 30 family members and former hostages and unlawful detainees from all around the world. So a part of the letter says, which we have here and we want to share with everyone and with the media. The United Nations has the potential as well as the responsibility to play a global pivotal role towards ending hostage diplomacy. However, for a sustainable and empowered global approach, recommendations and strategies on this issue must also leverage the expertise of diverse multi-stakeholders representing all relevant and fundamental components of society, including former hostages, families, human rights organizations, civil societies, the private sector, in addition to government entities. Together, all of their constituents have the necessary inherent power and impact to find realistic and effective solutions. As an experienced body with a successful track record of convening multi-stakeholder initiatives, the UN can facilitate the organizing of an international annual hostage forum in partnership with stakeholders to participate in dialogue and agree upon recommendations and strategies that will enable the development of a sustainable legal and practical framework. The forum will also give rise to a multi-stakeholder body to oversee the progress and implementation of these consensual recommendations that will eventually lead to reducing new cases, accelerating release, and dismantling the hostage business model on a global level. I would like to invite our final panelists, please, to take their seats. So I am pleased to welcome Julie Sunday. Julie is Assistant Deputy Minister, Consular, Security and Emergency Management, and leads Canada's Consular Policy and Operations, Travel Advice, and International Emergency Policy and Operations. In addition to leading Canada's response to complex consular cases, she has been spearheading efforts to advance the Canadian-led Declaration Against Arbitrary Detention in State-to-State Relations. Joining us also is Jorge Toledo. Jorge, originally from Caracas, Venezuela, has lived a diverse life. Holding past senior positions in the oil and gas industry, he's also flourished as an artist, marathon runner, and enterprise architect. His extraordinary journey encompasses surviving a challenging 1,775-day illegal detention in Venezuela. Jorge possesses expertise spanning both technology and business. Post-release, Toledo's public speaking endeavors draw from his survival story, inspiring others and bringing attention to the concept of hostage diplomacy. We are very pleased to also have Mr. Hugh Dugan with us. Hugh is an international affairs practitioner and scholar, having served in the diplomatic corps, senior executive service, academia, and media for 38 years. Mr. Dugan served in the National Security Council as special assistant to the president and senior director for international organization affairs in 2020. He managed U.S. foreign policy interests throughout the United Nations system and many other international entities, and thematic topics such as human rights and humanitarian affairs. Mr. Dugan served as acting special presidential envoy for hostage affairs in 2019, managing U.S. diplomatic engagements in that sensitive operational sphere. His leadership in that all-of-government effort produced an unprecedented momentum of recoveries, a strengthening of U.S. policy and capacity, and improved methods of work with hostages' families, U.S. Congress, and associated actors. Joining us virtually, is also Jared Genzer, who has been an international human rights lawyer for more than 2 decades. He is managing director of Perseus Strategies, a public interest law firm. He is referred to by the New York Times as the extractor for his work freeing political prisoners worldwide, which have included Americans imprisoned in Cuba, Iran, Myanmar, and Nicaragua. He is also the lawyer of the Namazis, specifically now Siamak Namazi. So it will be very interesting to hear from Jared, and congratulations on Siamak's release. Finally, that family is reunited. Our moderator for the panel is Nadia Belbesi Charters. Nadia is a veteran journalist and the Washington bureau chief of Al Arabiya Television, a leading pan-Arab news channel. With over 30 years of experience as a foreign correspondent, Nadia has made significant contributions to the field of journalism. Notably, she holds the distinction of being the first Arab journalist to be stationed in Africa for a major Arab TV station. Her fair reporting, which reflects building bridges and strengthening understanding between the US and the Arab and Muslim world, earned her US citizenship in the EBI category. Now, again, before we start this panel, we're going to start with a short video as an intro to this panel.
I feel that we're stronger when we're unified. I'm in favor of an internationally coordinated effort to prevent and speedily resolve hostage and illegally detained cases.
I hope that all nations can come together to recognize the counterproductive nature of hostage diplomacy.
So that's why we're asking if all of the European countries and the USA and Canada and Australia and all of these Western nations work together on a combined effort to put pressure on the Islamic regime to free all of the hostages and leave nobody behind. That's when we can beat the cycle of hostage taking and ransom payments and everything else. That's when we can stop hostage diplomacy, or at least show the Islamic regime that we're not here to be blackmailed, that we have the upper hand when we're putting all of our pressure of all of these countries together. We can free everybody.
If the UN, EU, OAS, BRICS, and other international mechanisms can cooperate and create a framework for resolving arbitrary detentions, we will all benefit. Hostage diplomacy is on the rise worldwide, and only together will we defeat it.
Hostages are people whose lives are sacred, just like yours and mine. They should not be debased and turned into something less than human. This type of behavior needs to be stopped, and no country should leave anyone left behind. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol, and thank you, Nizar. It's an honor for me to moderate this panel, and hopefully that what we do today, it will lead to some kind of global action that will change the status quo. You know, being a journalist, I always say the best service we can do to society is to be objective and to be neutral. But also, a journalist cannot stand silent when you see injustice, and you have to raise your voice very loud. And the questions that maybe Ghazal has raised, I raised them at the White House briefings and at the State Department's briefings, and I got the same answer, unfortunately. Today, I was attending the press conference with Secretary Blinken was speaking, and he talked about being emotional for the day that we have seen 5 American hostages coming home. And it's a great day for, as you said, for every family and for every hostage that was held illegally and wrongfully by the Iranian regime. I cannot imagine what they go through. But also we can hear the criticism of the 5 plus 5, or 5 in return for 5 plus 6, which is the $6 billion that the US has paid for that. Hopefully that we keep raising these questions about who is left behind and why they left behind. And as you said, I think Deborah was talking about President Clinton at the time, and I think covering the White House for the last 20 years, I can tell you that politicians sometimes, moral convictions and politicians don't go together. So unfortunately, sometimes it's, most of the decisions are calculated. And you know, as I said, hopefully that something that we do today will lead to a better framework of how we can go forward, that no person is held at any country and under any circumstances wrongfully and detained for whatever reason. So with this, I would like to talk about, in this final panel, about the global aspect of it all. Now, I'll reference again Secretary Blinken when he actually thanked few countries for the release of the 5 hostages today. He thanks Switzerland, Oman, Qatar, and the UK. So maybe this is a good example of how countries can get together in one case. But let me start with you, Julie. And Canada has been leading, actually. They have very strong record on human rights. And now they have a new initiative. So first of all, before I get to the challenges, tell us about this new initiative. And do you think that actually Canada can coordinate with other countries? I'm going to leave the UN aside now and NGOs and others, but at least other countries that actually can give us a better understanding of how we can solve this issue.
Thanks very much, and thank you so much for having us here today. I'm really pleased to be able to address everyone on this important initiative. So first, though, I want to express my admiration and gratitude for all of you who are working on this issue, raising advocacy, and being impacted by it directly. So we really welcome your insights. I also want to express Canada's appreciation for Hostage Aid worldwide support of our initiative against arbitrary detention in state-to-state relations, which my team is responsible for continuing to build. So, I mean, why are we in this? It's because when states target foreign nationals for diplomatic leverage or retaliation, the safety and the freedom of everybody who travels, works, studies, or lives abroad is at risk. People should never be bargaining chips or used for diplomatic leverage. For the victims and the families and friends, the human cost is profound and long-lasting. And we know that recovery for both victims and their loved ones is incredibly difficult. This is what prompted Canada to launch in February 2021 the Declaration Against Arbitrary Detention in State-to-State Relations, which is an international effort to deter and ultimately end this practice of arbitrary arrest, detention, or sentencing of individuals by states for diplomatic leverage. So the declaration is non-binding, and it reaffirms existing principles in international law. And importantly, the declaration itself is very focused on the principle. So we don't name perpetrating states, but it is very focused on the need to end this reprehensible practice. The declaration is there to help protect not only individuals, but also the basic principles of cooperation, fair play, mutual respect between states. And it really is there to reinforce the rules-based international order. It's also about international security. So a key priority for all nations is the security of their citizens abroad. Arbitrary detention for political leverage breeds fear, it breeds distrust amongst peoples and states, it diminishes opportunities for dialogue, and it thwarts bilateral cooperation during a time when the world needs it most. So I'm really pleased to let you know that since its launch, the declaration now has 71 countries endorsing it, in addition to the European Union. And we hope to have more announcements shortly. It has also received support from the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, and the G7. So the increasing number of endorsements is really an indication of a growing international consensus around this issue. So it's my pleasure to let you know that on Wednesday we are co-hosting with Costa Rica, with Malawi, with the United States, a high-level dialogue on arbitrary detention in state-to-state relations right here in New York at our permanent mission. And this is an opportunity to take stock of progress, to share sort of next steps, and also really look closely at the issue of deterrence and how we build the deterrence mechanisms. And I'm really pleased a number of people here will be there. We'll also live cast this event. Jason Rezaian will address the group as well, which we're really very pleased about. In addition to Michael Kovrig, who, of course, was a Canadian detainee. So our goal is really, with the launch of the declaration, our next step is to really anchor this in the international normative framework. And to do this, we need to really understand what it is, where the gaps in international law are, and how we can address them. So this is really where we're focused. But I also wanted to just indicate and mention sincerely how important it is for us to work with academia, with civil society, in learning about all the various elements of this issue so that we can collectively influence that international environment and with the ultimate goal of deterring this practice. So thank you really for the opportunity to be here, and I will turn it back to you and to my colleagues here.
Thank you, Julie. Let me go to Jared, since we're talking today about the release of the 5 hostages. Just give us some understanding of how the Iranian regime deals with legally with, for example, with somebody like you who are advocating on behalf of Mr. Namazi, and talking about cooperation between different parties. Were you allowed, for example, to share anything with other hostages? Were you limited in terms of the information that you were given? How much leeway you were allowed by the regime in terms of sharing some, not just information, but actually advice to the other hostages?
Well, look, I mean, this is not, I think, as everyone knows, a legal case in any sense, really whatsoever. The judiciary in Iran is neither independent nor impartial. And the reality is that, the International Convention on Hostage Taking talks about a person who is a hostage is a person who's taken for something of value, right? And so the law, despite being a lawyer, as I am, and an expert at international law, one of my most recent books was a 650-page book on the United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention. The law has nothing to do with what's going on in Iran when it comes to, the state-sponsored taking of hostages. It has to do with pure power politics and trying to gain leverage in an ongoing series of political disputes. Today is a tough day that you're catching me on because it's after about being awake for 30 hours and dealing with, of course, the release of Siamak Namazi and his family. And I'm reflecting a lot today on the 7.5-year journey that I've been on, 1,900 pro bono hours of time of me and my team. Babak Namazi, for example, the son/brother, he and I took 15 trips to Washington, meeting 30 or 40 people at a time. 650 media interviews, 700 political meetings all around the world, right? And as I look back on 7 years of this work, I asked myself, why did it take all of this work? And what does that mean about where we are on this question? It seems to me quite clearly that governments give a lot of lip service to the importance of these efforts. But at the end of the day, I mean, as someone who's represented hostages around the world, American hostages in many places around the world and political prisoners as well, the only metric that matters to me and the clients that I've represented is the measure that you're proposing going to actually get people out of jail, right? What is the success rate? How many people have been freed as a result of what you're talking about? And to me, that's the fundamental question here. I'm all for, engaging in the international community. I'm an expert at the international human rights system, but to me, that isn't necessarily going to be the most effective approach. And so, last summer, I published an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal where what I suggested was that what we really need to do to change hostage taking around the world is to create draconian disincentives for hostage taking. Because today, if a hostage is taken of any one country around the world, most countries do little to nothing about it. And ultimately, while every country in the world says they don't want to pay ransoms, they don't want to make policy concessions, ultimately, most of them end up doing that. In fact, mostly all of them end up doing that. And so, we've been doing it the same way for many, many years. And why has it failed? It's failed because we've been doing it, one country, one hostage at a time. And so I propose, I actually drafted what this declaration could look like, a multilateral agreement where there are 26 options for countries to take that sign on to this agreement, that they can take individually and collectively if one hostage is taken from a country. All of the countries that sign on to this non-binding agreement would agree to at least consider looking at the 26 options. options and considering what they might do unilaterally and then multilaterally to try to put pressure on the country. It's one thing if the U.S. wants to do something about a hostage that was taken, but imagine if the U.S. teamed up with 45 or 50 other countries around the world and were able to get an enormous amount of pressure on a country that takes a single hostage. That is what you have to do to disrupt the hostage enterprise and the financial incentives for taking hostages. To me, that's the only kind of thing that is going to change the calculus of countries that engage in this despicable and deplorable practice, right? They're doing it because it's a smart thing for them to do. And I say that because it always works. They take hostages, there's no pressure. Everybody says we don't want to pay ransoms, and we do, and they get more money, and they just do it again and again, wash, rinse, repeat. And we have to do something dramatically different. And while I definitely appreciate all the efforts that are being taken by Canada and by many countries around the world and by the United Nations and so forth, my question is, how many of these efforts have resulted in hostages being released? And it seems to me that that should be the metric by which we measure our success.
Well, I'll ask you to answer probably some of these questions in terms of can we get the UN, for example, since we are now talking about the General Assembly meeting, to sign something equivalent to the Human Rights Universal Declaration? What's the challenges for that? And do you think there is the legal and diplomatic approaches from different countries that prohibit them from having a unified approach?
Thank you very much for your question. And I echo very much Robert O'Brien's statement. I'm not going to try to summarize or repeat what he said, but it was heartfelt. And the administration, Secretary Pompeo, the Vice President, the President, were all open doors on all of these points. We did not have to push hard to get their attention. So I'm very flattered to be invited and to participate with you here tonight. I know time is short. I have a speech. I'm not reading it. I read it last week in Santa Barbara to their Committee on Foreign Relations. They invited me to speak on this topic there. I came back to New York because it is the opening of the General Assembly. And you may have in front of you the one person who knows the UN and hostage and how the two intersect. And I'm more than happy and willing to offer my advice, specifically tactical advice, as you put it, to achieve what this group would like to see happen immediately at the UN and over the long term for some practicable outcomes. The first piece of tactical advice would be the very well composed letter you sent to the Secretary General. Technically should go to somebody of a higher protocol status, the President of the General Assembly. Now, that's a secret inside. The Secretary General over time has a 5-year term instead of just the 1-year term the President has. And over time, the Secretary General has arrogated unto his office a lot more authority than the UN Charter would recognize, but it's become a bad habit. The President of the General Assembly is the one party who is elected by all countries, all member states. I had dinner with him last night. I'm going to be advising him this year informally about some of the pitfalls that occur during the course of a General Assembly session, because I had the privilege of being there for 26 of them, and then invited by the President to advise on the UN relations as Special Assistant to the President in the White House. So the President of the General Assembly represents the peoples, we the peoples of the United Nations, not we the Secretariat, who are wonderful international civil servants, but are not accountable as our ambassadors and the President of the General Assembly to requests and overtures such as yours. So first and foremost, I would suggest that that letter be copied and sent in the first instance to the President of the General Assembly, and I will personally deliver that for you. Because what we need in the course of an outcome is a UN General Assembly resolution, which is the strongest type of statement the organization can create, which would then instruct the Secretary General and his many staff and others to execute on the member states' will. So I won't bore you with a lot of UNEs and the bureaucracy that occurs there, but just to say your initiative is very well founded. It's extremely well prepared, and I'm so impressed with what Canada has done so far. And I know that Canada understands some of these intricacies as well too, and they're proceeding on a very sensible path, one step at a time, building support as they go along, and I'm eager to see how that momentum translates into more action tomorrow. I don't think there are any doubters or any disparagers of the topic. I think the UN itself needs to be awoken again to this malady of hostage taking in the world. I believe there's only been one resolution in the 70s that called upon some type of attention to be brought against it, and ironically Iran was among those that supported it greatly, but of course very cynically. In the role I had in the White House, I was preparing us to do just this, and unfortunately our time ended in January of 2020, to come to the UN and seek a global consensus on a norm that affects all of mankind, and not to try to broker one hostage dispute against another. The UN is not a boxing ring. We don't like to give a platform to two countries having a fight in public. So we seek to find that global norm and establish a consensus, and then provide the Secretary General and his staff, whom we employ, the means and the direction to undertake some action on this behalf. So the declaration is a fabulous start. You've done so much of the work. It would have taken the Secretariat years, I'm sure, to accomplish what you've done so quickly and so effectively. And I look forward to enabling that in any way possible. Thank you.
Great. I actually have a follow-up on Iran, but I'll ask it later. Jorge, must be the worst feeling in the world just to be thrown into a jail and not knowing what's going to happen to you. We debated through the different panels whether it's a good idea to advertise it, whether to talk to the media, whether to make a public campaign about one's case, or to have multi-approach to it, whether it's your government or human rights organizations or others. I want to know first about your experience. How do you feel? Do you feel abandoned, for example? Does the news get to you when actually people are advocating on your behalf? Just give us an idea of what you went through.
Okay, that's a very complex question, but bring some memories on that I want to bring, not as a bad moments, as an opportunities to bring solutions on this. Because my experience was that we went through an evolution in our case, in almost 5 years. We went from, the nothingness, a dark hole, all the way to build awareness. And that was mainly because of the own system. As my colleague Jose Pereira mentioned, so we discovered that in 2018, our relatives were instructed by our own government to keep low profile in order to avoid to irritate the Venezuelan regime. But also, since the legal system in Venezuela is broken and everything is handled by briberies, the Venezuelan attorneys recommended our families to remain silent because everything in Venezuela was resolved via lobby. So with high officials in the government. So as a consequence of that, the 2018 was for me, the lost year. So the year of silence, the year of darkness. In 2019, our families decided to break the silence and go public. And we said, well, the Venezuelan government is the one that are the abductors, for naming in the way it is. And the U.S. government is playing politics. they decided to go public and go to Washington. My son went to Washington in April 2019 to start talking to U.S. officials, people in the Congress, even with the Vice President at that time, Mike Pence. And something that I learned about that, several months later, that cost me a struggle in prison was when I learned about a conversation that my son had in the Congress. And the question from my son was very simple. What is the plan that you guys have to bring my dad home? In plain words. And the response was, we do not have a plan to bring your dad home. We have a plan to address the Venezuelan situation, and as a consequence of that, your dad is going to be back, but not otherwise. So that is the raw truth on the way this has been handled. But I have to say that the more contact and the more interaction that our families had with the media, the more awareness was created. As a consequence, and my takeaway is that the media is our key partner in this endeavor. Because, everybody has their agenda, but media is your tool. Media is your last resort. And we as hostages, but also our families, needs to have a creative and an assertive and a pragmatic way to address media and use the media as your own partner. Because, what we're in front of a crime. So hostage diplomacy is a crime. And I struggle with the semantics of wrongful detainee versus hostage. Guys, an abduction perpetrated by terrorists, by a leftist guerrilla, by common crime or a state is an abduction. And an abduction is as a crime. And guess what? Whoever commits a crime is a criminal. And I think that when we talk about, awareness, the use of media, and so I'm seeing a gap. And I'm seeing a gap, and this is my experience in prison and my conversations, even with my custodians, the guys that were, taking care of me on a daily basis. So I think that the gap is on how to address the root cause of this, or the incentive. Or in other words, what incentivizes a state to commit a crime like this? And from my observation and my experience, there are two key root causes on this. The first one is to give a face value to the human commodity, meaning the hostage. And that is the result of negotiations and politics. Gazelle mentioned something, that you nail it, because, when you cherry pick people that needs to be returned, automatically you are, giving a face value to that human commodity. Let me tell you a conversation when, on October the 1st last year, when we were released, prior to our, that the authorities took us to the airport to finally take a plane and go to San Vincent and the Grenadines to do the prisoner swap. The custodians there, the guards in prison were asking, hey, but, why these guys are leaving and there's some others that are staying? And I remember a comment from one of the guards that responded, imagine that this is a soccer team and you have Cristiano Ronaldo and Messi on one side, and then you have, John Smith on the other side. So that is the perception of face value, and this is very detrimental on the long-term process. That is, one of the incentives for these states. The second incentive is impunity. My observation on these guards in Venezuela was that, you know, they can do anything they want because nothing is going to happen to them. But
No
guess what?
accountability.
In conversations I had with guards from SEBIN and the DGCIM in Venezuela, I learned about how afraid they are to be involved in cases related to human rights violation, even with investigations from the ICC prosecutor on crimes against humanity. So they are afraid about justice and accountability, but they feel good because there's no a system in place of justice and accountability. And I think that that's the next step we need to take. Using leveraging media and leveraging, you know, the international legal system in order to bring punitive criminal charges to the perpetrators of the crime. And I think we, as a global initiative, we have the tools and we need to implement these tools. And for me, the tool is the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, because my conclusion after these almost 5 years of being in prison and almost a year after being released is that hostage diplomacy is a crime against humanity, and it is perfectly defined in the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. These are my 2 cents.
Well, it's an excellent way of framing the whole issue that I'll take it to Julie. So do you think actually, and what, just to complement what Hugh was saying about this, raising the issue on that level, do you think like name and shame should be part of holding these people? It's not just to make them fear that there is a huge price, whether it's their government or asking them to do it, but ultimately they're going to face justice. And it will be justice on a very high level, i.e. taken to the International Court of, of Justice, or taking them into some kind of international accountability, etc. So it's not just localize the issues, but take them further. So, and that will apply to Iran, whether it's a judge who, make these small cases that people confess into crimes or whatever, but make them pay the price. It's not just the regime or the person at the top, but actually the people who implement these policies. Sorry.
Steal that heavy microphone. So I think there's a lot to do. And I can say that, and there are 2 really key pieces of this issue. One is building this deterrence agenda. And this is why global cooperation is so important, and states working together or international organizations or everyone. And the goal is to raise the reputational risks involved in using this as a tactic. I think that's really important. There is the flip side of this is having to respond to these cases, and it is very, very difficult to do that. I can tell you from a consular perspective, these are the hardest, most difficult cases to work on. And again, doing that is also, global cooperation is also important to that. And I think that is certainly happening. I know that, it's meaningful when, I think to when Michael Kovrig was being, his case was being, when he was being charged and heard, when over 20 ambassadors went and stood with our ambassador outside the courtroom. Like that was a very powerful moment, and it was really important, certainly, in showing that global solidarity for someone who was innocent, who was being charged. I think in terms of where do we go with this, there is a lot of work to do to look at the international legal piece and what the norms are. Yes, this is a human rights issue, absolutely. But it's not just a human rights issue. This engages issues around how states conduct themselves. And there is a lot to unpack there and look at. And that is something that we are very interested in doing so that we can articulate this in a way that the multilateral community understands. So.
Before I go to Jared, but Hugh, quickly on Iranian issue, we talked about it so many times. Do you think that the West and the United States in particular dealt with Iran differently than any other country because they have interest, whether it is trying to neutralize Iran when it comes to the nuclear issue or Iran nefarious activities in the Gulf, or even during the Obama administration that European companies wanted to do business with Iran. So they've been taking different soft approach that although they conflict in the issues, although they say clearly, no, we separate these tracks, we're dealing with the president separately, the nuclear issue, etc. So do you think that was a weak point from the West to start with towards prisoners and hostages in Iran?
Thank you for the question. And I would say with any country holding a hostage, we have multiple equities at work. There is trade, consular matters, there are all sorts of cross-border relations that unfortunately the Turkish desk, the Syrian desk, if we had one, the Iranian desk, if we had one, and the State Department have a calculation of interests. For that desk, the hostage element, if one exists, is one piece of their calculation. For the SPIHA's office, it's our only piece. And what I found difficult was dealing within Washington almost as difficult as it was dealing overseas, if not more so on specific cases, because we had bureaucracies who did not want SPIHA's sharp elbows in their work. We were one small office, we're one-man Pentagon, frankly, the SPIHA office, with no material, and an entire bureaucracy that has to absorb us all of a sudden in their calculations. With the title of presidential, we have the privilege of going overseas and acting on his behalf, so we're a bit outside the rank and order of these other desks and the bureaucracies. So they would jealously guard their equities with Turkey, for instance, or another state where we had a Saudi, where we had a hostage, and they weren't always forthcoming to my office or to Robert with the information we requested because of these other equities at work. And so that is an institutional problem. I write an article, I have a column in Newsmax, and I've written a 5-part series on hostage affairs, and you're free to Google that. And I call upon the president to grow into his skin. And if this is in fact an all-of-government effort, he's got to issue the orders loud and clear across government not to obfuscate or not to interfere with the SPIHA's critical task for hostage recovery for the sake of not disrupting some trade relation that might happen or some other export matter with that country. So it's not typically strictly just an Iranian problem. Of course, we have JCPOA and many other irritating elements in the relationship, but let's not keep it just to Iran. It's true in our Department of State. Our bureaucracy in general is an all-of-government effort, and we have to be reminded, and that comes from the president's office. And I believe it would be useful to hear from that office marching orders far and wide throughout Washington, D.C., that this is job one, and this is critical. And just how critical it is, I'll just give you a very short lesson in diplomatese. And the types of activities that are thrown at the U.S. from abroad and the appropriate level of response that the U.S. diplomacy should require, from a minor response all the way to a maximal response. So if there is a diplomatic protest against American foreign policy, that merits from the United States a minor response. Our spokesman every day should be prepared to have a talking point that more or less notes the diplomatic protest. If a foreign country has canceled a meeting that we intended to hold with them, that merits a notable response from us. Let's say a foreign government uses an explicit threat to use force against the United States. Now our response goes from notable, we have to elevate. It's an elevated response. And I know this is very dictionary-like, but just to make my point quickly, if they close their embassy, in our country. That we must say, or they close our embassy and they ask us to leave their country, that merits a severe response. And what would require a maximal response? A declaration of war or a detainment of an American citizen. This is textbook knowledge. This is where the taxonomy exists. Declaration of war is no less, no greater than the detainment of an American, meriting, justifying, requiring maximal response on our behalf. So that president has to say, if this is a special presidential envoy, of which there have been a scant 5 or 6 in American history, by the way, very few in history. George Marshall was a presidential envoy after World War II to establish the Marshall Plan. After World War I, Colonel House was a special presidential envoy to broker the peace agreements after World War I. And this president, these 3 presidents have agreed to have a special presidential envoy on hostage affairs. We must educate them and the bureaucracy what that means historically. It means the issue is from the president. He takes no political cover from any party. He can't blame Congress or blame his Secretary of State. This is the highest rank of envoy that we have because we're dealing with the situation that requires maximal response. And the public needs to know that this is what they should be demanding when it comes to hostage affairs. And I'm grateful to this enterprise and to journalists here who are willing to educate and broadcast this to the public in general, because a great deal of education needs to be done. As you say, a lot of work needs to be done as well in the UN setting. Thank you.
Thank you, Hugh. So, Jared, how do we create an international consensus when it comes to calling a spade a spade? How can we move from just wrongfully detained to just call them actually hostages? And the countries who take them are hostage takers. And how do you create this understanding, if you want, using a moderate word, of these sham trials and even confessions that we see on television, that they're not real? And therefore, as you mentioned or alluded to, that we cannot even be a lawyer in a defense lawyer in a real court, because these courts are not, there are sham courts, kangaroo courts, whatever you want to call them. So are we able to do that on a multi-national level and international level, considering that the UN sometimes, when it comes to human rights, you see rogue states actually chairing the Council on Human Rights. In the past, we've seen so many countries from third world countries, whether it was Iran that the administration said they kicked them out recently on the Human Rights Council, Libya and others, Syria even. So how can we create this international consensus?
Well, that could be the topic of a dissertation or several books, but in a few moments, let me try to offer a few thoughts. Look, there are no easy solutions here. We all know that well. I've tried as an international human rights lawyer to combine legal, political, and public relations advocacy when I'm trying to help American hostages or other hostages or political prisoners get out of jail around the world, because these are not fundamentally genuine legal cases. But nonetheless, I will take a case, for example, to the United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention, which gives you the opportunity to adjudicate the case and ultimately, ideally, get an opinion that finds a person as being held illegally and in violation of international law. And it still matters a lot around the world that the UN has declared a person as being illegally detained, rather than just the lawyer saying that they're illegally detained, or a government whose national is detained saying that it is illegal. So I think that actually still matters in the international community. International law actually, I think, does still matter. But at the same time, when you're talking about state-sponsored hostage taking, that is something else entirely. And I say that because, the case of my client, Sam McNamara, for example, he had a trial where no evidence was presented against him. It was a closed hearing, and he had no idea why he was there. He was just there for a few minutes, in and out, that's it. And then later, he and his lawyer met with the judge, who gave his lawyer a 50-page judgment that he wasn't even able to see. And then later, his lawyer told him a few sentences about it. And well, that was the beginning and the end of his 10-year sentence for collaborating with the hostile state. So, again, when you look at the International Convention on Hostage Taking, which to me is the operative legal instrument to be looking at, it doesn't focus on due process or rule of law questions. It simply says a person has been grabbed for something of value, right? And the law has nothing to do with it at all. I will say that, the United States and many of the countries around the world are very hesitant to call people hostages. I have called Siamak Namazi a hostage because he meets the international law definition of a hostage. And yet, the US government has never called my client a hostage. They have said that he's unlawfully detained or wrongfully detained. And to me, that's a travesty of justice because the reality is that being a hostage is a subset of the overall category of being wrongfully detained. But it's one in which you should be able to get the help of your government in dramatically more important ways than if you're just simply wrongly detained. If you're wrongly detained, well, there can be lots of ways to go at that issue, legal, political, public relations, and so forth, and you can try to bring some justice to bear on the situation. But if you're a hostage, if you're detained for something of value, right, that your government is supposed to pay, then you actually have no remedy yourself through any legal system to remedy the situation. In the case of U.S. Iran, for example, I can't go lobby, the United Nations to help Siamak Namazi get out of jail because the reality is that Iran just wants to cut a deal with the United States. And so the biggest and hardest part of engaging with state-sponsored hostage taking is, as I would say, as someone who's been a lawyer for many, many hostages, is you have to get both governments to come together, right, and be willing to talk at the same time. And that's a very, very difficult thing to do. And it means your options are incredibly narrowly limited. And it also should mean, in my view, that governments whose citizens and nationals are being grabbed around the world have a much higher duty to help people in those circumstances, right? Because they're actually a hostage, because they have no remedy to help themselves, and the law is no longer a relevant query. So we have a very, very long way to go. Again, for me, as a human rights lawyer, all I really care about are the outcomes. When you're with the families, you want a sense of urgency. You want people to wake up every day and think about your loved one in jail and what are they doing today to get them out, right? And if it hasn't worked, try something else. And if that doesn't work, try something after that. And so I think that we have to both go at this at the international system and work at developing new frameworks and systems. But at the same time, we can't forget about all the people who are currently hostages right now. And we need to figure out a totally different way to disincentivize hostage taking that puts yourself into the minds of these dictators and how they think and operate. And a dictator operates by fear. Fear of loss of power, fear of justice and accountability, fear of their families being targeted, fear of their assets being seized. And if you're talking about state-sponsored hostage taking, unless you can appeal to one of their fears, then why would they let a hostage go? And I think that tragically, what the world has done with this phenomena is governments are afraid because of the equity that Hugh was rightly talking about, to be willing to take a serious action in response to a country taking a hostage, because we have 10 different issues to discuss with that country, and we just can't make the hostage the real issue here, right? But then when the government that has taken the hostage sees that response, well, they say, why don't I just sit around and wait? And even if, you see countries around the world demanding the immediate unconditional release of their hostages, when that isn't followed by concrete action that actually demonstrates a country is serious, my own experience has been, representing many hostages, that it's far worse to have a government repeatedly say that a person must be immediately and unconditionally released and then do absolutely nothing to demonstrate that they mean it than it is to have them say nothing at all. And so we have a lot of work to do.
Right. Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Jared. Thank you, Jorge. Thank you, Hugh and Julie. We are running out.
Yeah, we have a question.
Right. We have one, so we are running out of time. I wanted to ask Jorge another question, but we don't. So we have to open it up for the audience.
Yeah, so I got a question from Olivier Dubois, who was online. Olivier is a former hostage, a French hostage who was released recently. He was taken in Mali. And he asked, so would it be possible to obtain a unified position against hostage diplomacy, and what is possible effectively to do? So I don't know who would like to answer this question.
Any of you? Sure. But we have to answer it shortly, right? Because we're running out of time.
Yeah, I'll be very quick, but this is effectively what Canada is trying to do in focusing on these cases of arbitrary detention for diplomatic leverage. And, this is a long-term activity, and obviously the ultimate objective is to deter. I think we've had some interesting discussion here about how do you disincentivize this, right? That's really crucial. And then at the same time, continuing to do the work that everybody's doing, and I know, I see Beth from the SPIHA office here as well, to really respond and to address the cases. But I mean, I'll tell you, our life would be a lot easier with a lot less of these cases. So we're very focused on both of those pieces. And I do think the declaration, I mean, we had 55 countries sign on in February 2021. We have 72 now. That's a good number, and it's growing. So we will continue to commit to doing that work to get that done.
Okay, great. Okay, Nizar, you have some more?
I have two questions. One for you. What do you think should be done? Can to designate in a time frame, to designate unlawfully designation in the U.S. with a certain time frame? Because as you can see currently, it's becoming a political thing that the secretary can sleep on a designation forever. And there is nothing in the Levinson Act about this issue. The other question is for Jared. Have you talked to Siamak? How is he? Just let us know. We missed him so much.
Yeah.
I was with him in prison.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, that makes me tear up. It's been a very emotional day, as you can imagine, and he's become like a brother to me through this ordeal, and his family, my family, and I was talking to him over the last several weeks. As in the run up to the release, we talk a lot, and was able to see him on video for the first time over the course of the last several weeks, and to see a smile on his face was just extraordinary. And it was funny because he got on the plane, and I had a couple of journalists asking me, was it like profound? What did he say? And I'm like, well, he got on the plane. He called me. He's like, no, I want to make a few final changes to my statement. So I'm like, no, it wasn't profound. But he called me from the tarmac to just tell me that they were about to be wheels up. And then when they landed, we all saw the moment of all of them walking off. And I've been working on this for a long time. It was a lot to take in. And he then called me about 2 minutes later and said, Jared, I'm free. And I mean, this is what makes all the hard work worthwhile. Nobody should have to go through what the Namazis went through or any of these other families have gone through. And the cries of these families need to be heard. They need to be understood. And, diplomacy has a critical role, of course. But at the end of the day, we're all human, right? And nobody should be treated in this manner. And our governments are created by the people, that vote and elect our governments in democracies. And if we want to make this a priority, we can and we will. But governments have to listen to their people, and so much more needs to be done. It should not have been this hard. It should not have taken so long. It should not have taken the Namazis being left behind by President Obama once, President Trump twice, right? I mean, how much should one family have to go through, right? And I'm sorry. I mean, you caught me on a bit of an emotional day here, but where's the sense of urgency? Where's the sense of urgency? And I honestly just don't feel it. I mean, I know there are lots of people in the audience and lots of people around the world who are working hard at these issues, and very, very, very hard at them. But to me, when I've lived through these nightmares with these families so many times, I just, we're not even doing slightly close to enough. We're not even in the ballpark. We're having a conversation about something and not even touching the core problem in any way at all. And we're just missing it entirely. And I mean, I think we have to humanize this discussion, and we have to talk about the victims and what they've gone through, and their testimony is critical. And at the end of the day, working with Babak Namazi over 7 years, this poor man has been through so much, carrying his family through this. And I was with him, now I'm gonna cry. I was with him when 600 times he had to tell his story to people and what he and his family had to go through, crying every single time, right? And that's what he had to do to get people to care. And even then, it took 8 years to get to today. And I'm sorry, we're just not doing good enough. We have to do more.
Okay.
I will be brief. That's very moving, and I am touched by that as well. To try to answer your question, how quickly should wrongful detention be ascertained? And of course, we know each case is so distinct. I don't want to say it's an art, but it's not a science. The application of wrongful detention too soon, I believe is what happened in the Griner case. I don't think she was wrongfully detained. And I think it undermined our moral authority to continue insisting on that even after there was evidence and a confession, all of those things. So in that case, it was far too soon, and it, I don't believe should have been used. And I think it's undermined the whole wrongful detention argument that we make abroad. So we have a lot of repair to do in Washington, projecting an image of consequences to those who are thinking or who have taken captives. That is the important element of the declaration, to develop consequences. It might be reputational, otherwise. And if we are willing to declare wrongful detention so quickly without due deliberation, not that it's always on time, then we undermine that capacity. I'd like to just end with one idea. If, in fact, we do declare an American wrongfully detained, and it in fact, creates a new categorization of effort on our behalf, then I believe that person is an unwitting, unenlisted member of our military of sorts. I mean, they are used as an asset, unfortunately, in foreign policy matters. There's a leveraging against that person to seek advantage out of U.S. foreign policy. And I believe that person and their families and others who need care then and thereafter should qualify for some form of veterans assistance. Perhaps we call it something else, but their resources should be brought forward by the government to recognize that this person wasn't just personally suffering. They were a martyr, so to speak, to American foreign policy and the integrity of our presence and reputation overseas, and that at least we should consider that as an element in assisting families and hostages throughout and after the ordeal. Thank you.
Well, thank you, panelists. Again, I hope that if we meet next year, that we'll have good news for you, Ghazal, that we have your dad with us. And the family of every person who, I'm just like catching from Jared, I'm sorry. But I just hope that next year we'll have everybody with us. And I really encourage every person in the room to do whatever they can, because together we can do something. Sometimes we feel we are impotent and it's a huge task, but I believe that collectively we can do something. So again, thank you very much, panelists, for sharing your experience.
Thank you so much. I'm gonna try not to take any more time, but in line with the need for global cooperation, we are happy to announce that we have decided to partner with EU Watch, an NGO which is based in Brussels, which scrutinizes the actions of the European Union and speaks out if the EU doesn't act in line with its declared values and principles. So we will work together to bring the issue of hostages where it belongs, closer to the public and to the decision makers in the EU, and to organize joint activities with them. We believe that when Washington and Brussels join forces, there's a lot more that can be done for the sake of people, for freedom and human rights. I'm trying to talk quickly and to get some of it out of the way. So I'm gonna, yeah, I scratched half of it. So now I know, because we all know the names of Ahmed Reza Jalali, Jamshid Sharmad, Nahid Tagavi, Cecile Kohler, Jacques Paris, Louis Arnaud, Santiago Sanchez, Johan Floderus, and other EU citizens. And these are the victims of Iran's long-standing hostage diplomacy, and we want to work with other like-minded organizations to work on hostage diplomacy. And now, finally, at last, I'm sure you're saying, I would like to play a very short video, a closing video on behalf of our board member, Jeffrey Dive, who is in the UK and couldn't join us in person. Jeff is also Richard Radcliffe's uncle and was involved in the Free Nazanin campaign. So we'll play this video, and then please let's all go outside and have a drink. Thank you so much.
Good evening. I just wanted to say a few words as we come to the end of this symposium, and to explain why I think that Hostage Aid Worldwide is so valuable for the families, many of whom are present with us today. Most importantly, it's based on trusted advice and first-hand experience from other people who have been in exactly the same position, people who are sympathetic and fully understand the many, many stresses which new hostage families inevitably feel, the urge that they have to do something but not sure what, who to trust, who to believe, how to get the attention of their government, whether to stay quiet as most consular officials will advise or whether to go public, and how to build an advocacy campaign. These are the typical dilemmas for which they have never been prepared. Hostage Aid Worldwide provides its services 100% pro bono, 100% apolitical, and 100% in absolute confidence. It affords hostage families an opportunity to discuss options, ideas from other cases, and through its wide network of contacts can help to open doors into places where they wouldn't necessarily be able to get into by themselves. Access to government ministers, parliamentarians, the media, United Nations, human rights lawyers specialized in this area, and so on. Furthermore, Hostage Aid Worldwide is very active in social media, supporting the advocacy of individual cases who have requested it. One of the things that we've all realized is that hostage diplomacy is a growing phenomenon. It's successful for the perpetrators, and sadly it's practiced by a broad range of actors. Unfortunately, the current tactical, ad hoc, back-channel approach to negotiations that most governments have is only relevant in the very early stages of a case, while it can be resolved quietly and before it's escalated to a full-blown dispute. But if quiet diplomacy is the only weapon after that, then the case is likely to be seen as an investment by the hostage takers, with the hostage being the main asset to bargain with. The outcome will be protracted and subject to ransom creep. If there's no moral hazard for the hostage takers, it simply encourages the practice to continue, a classic rinse and repeat, with new hostages taken to replenish when and if the case is resolved. What is missing is a strategic response, and this is where Hostage Aid Worldwide is really focusing efforts by researching similarities with other emerging soft warfare threats, cyber, disinformation, and so on. To this end, Hostage Aid Worldwide is investing in a risk-based approach that leverages the ever-increasing amount of global data, and what you've seen tonight is just the first stage of an ongoing scientific process. For the past 2 years, Hostage Aid has been researching hostages and unlawfully detained cases globally by gathering case information and building a comprehensive database of known unlawfully detained persons and hostages around the world. This is a continuous process, and Hostage Aid Worldwide has so far researched and documented thousands of unique cases of hostage taking and unlawful detention, from tens of thousands of relevant data points. The process is quite intensive and requires reviewing and scraping data from a massive set of news articles and other related records. This unique database includes case data starting in 1979 and provides fascinating insights into the rise of hostage diplomacy and political hostage taking. Our work uses modern methods to provide predictive analysis, which helps identify likely cases that have or could develop and to understand the best approach for dealing with them. But importantly, we need to get the accountability at the state and the individual perpetrator level, and we need to move from this current multilateral ad hoc approach to a systematic multi-stakeholder response for every case. And that's why we've created a public letter to the Secretary General of the United Nations which addresses this particular problem. And we think that the United Nations would be the ideal forum to bring together the multi-stakeholder form of governance and also representing the many experts in hostage diplomacy drawn from former hostages and family members, NGOs, civil societies, human rights advocates, and so on. So finally, I would like to say a few words to thank you. I hope you've all found the symposium useful. There will definitely be more, so we would like to have any of your comments or ideas how we can improve for future events. Have a safe trip back and stay tuned. Thank you.
Recording stopped.